Okay, this should be episode 6 of Counterpoints. I finally returned, guys. I'm back after Dreamhack Winter, way too late. So, I'm Thorin. Don't work for anyone, just work for myself. That's right. Self-important man. Made myself. Living my own dreams. I don't need another man or business in my life. So my guest this episode is actually a guy he comes from the old school of Counter-Strike, which is actually ridiculous because when I actually met him, he was like a young fucking scrub pup and I'd already been around like 5 years. I was like, who's this punk kid? But anyway, nowadays he's from the old school. And even though you see him now and he looks like he's from like, I don't know, Breaking Bad set or something, he actually used to have like flowing Samson-esque locks and he used to be a baby face and he used to be quite skilled at the game, but then he made the classic mistake of attempting to play a CPL with a team called Tech, which is how you end your career. That's actually like the graveyard of talented online players' careers, is playing in Tech, right?
That was the career killer for sure.
So my guest here is Moses, Jason O'Toole. His brother Hare used to play in a team called United 5, which many moons ago at CPL Winter 2003, they managed to finish, I think it was 7th place, was it?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, which at the time, well, that was actually the worst CPL ever for NA teams. So that was actually the highest placing NA team at the event. Ripped to the NA scene at that time. They did pick it up afterwards. So that was kind of his breakout into the scene in terms of the international thing. Now, you left CS, I think it was around like 2006, I think it's when you floated out the scene. You were in like that U5 team and then you gradually drifted out. So I literally hadn't seen you around at all since then. I think maybe you popped up every now and then on ESEA or something, but I never saw you in the scene, never saw you playing, I never saw you even really commenting on pro stuff. But I noticed you came back in CSGO, you turned up in the NA scene again, you start doing ESEA casting, you've done some other podcasts. Did you actually come back at the beginning of CSGO? When did you get back into it?
I started messing around with it in like the late betas, and I think kind of got the competitive juices flowing. So I started picking it up more and more, and started wanting to compete again after I started seeing all these tournaments pop up. And once the updates started coming that made the game a little bit better competitively, I really started getting into it.
So okay, this is a podcast. We're going to talk about topical stuff. It's not just going to be a straight up interview. So I'll save the other questions I could ask about what you think about CSGO and all that. And let's just dive straight into a big topic here. So even though Dreamhack Winter was like a month or more ago now, it's still like a big topic. And I haven't had a chance to break it down on a podcast. So I actually figure, even though to some people they might be like, oh, it's not topical anymore, I think it's more in a way. Because actually I've noticed with events in not in just the CS terms, in life in general, you never really can get that great a bead on what happened in an event like right afterwards. You're still sort of caught up within the process of it, like you might think something, you might exaggerate something in one way or another way, and it takes usually a couple of weeks and crucially some things to happen afterwards, and you kind of get a bit of perspective on it, like, now I can see like what happened there. I've always said in CS, that's one of the great things about doing analysis. It's really hard to predict things in the future and you can kind of go with your best guess. But if you look backwards, if you do your homework and you have the correct sort of logic, then you can nearly always tell the story in reverse. Like you can see, for example, when FNATIC win now, if you go back when they weren't winning, you can kind of see what they were missing there, or you can see what held them back here, or you can maybe see the seeds that were going to germinate into them winning late. You can kind of see all these things. So if we talk about Dreamhack Winter that way, if I just start at the top billing, okay, the team that won the event, LDLC, who had actually only won one LAN event beforehand with this lineup, which was just a small Star Ladder event and not a big international at all. They won the whole event. When they won that event, did that make them were they like the best team in the world at this event? Do you buy this line?
Yeah, I do. I actually, because they played so well. Like it finally looked like you said, they'd only won one other event, but they looked like it was all coming together for them. They were playing really well. They were playing really well against FNATIC before that whole issue blew up. But that was the first time we saw them actually, taking the game to FNATIC. Like they'd always been beaten by him, and this was the first time you really saw him kind of sticking it to him talent-wise. They were winning a lot of gunfights, and I thought even against NiP in the finals, they looked fantastic.
No, that's the thing. I'm in agreement actually, which is The thing with the LDLC team, here's what's funny. This is a good example of where fans are too quick to jump the gun by saying someone's really good or that they're already the best or they've already got to that level when they're still a bit missing. Is that now that you see them win Dreamhack Winter, kind of in line with what I was saying there, now you can see the things that they were missing in the tournaments before where they would lose to iBadPower, they lost to FNATIC all those times. You can see that they were shaky before or they lacked things on T-sides or they fell apart on certain maps that they should be strong on, Dust 2 or Inferno. This tournament, everything came together. Now, it wasn't like it came together and they dominated, but they got through the close matches, like you're saying there. And before the boost situation happened, they were actually just going to beat FNATIC straight up. No one had beaten FNATIC in all these tournaments, and they were just going to beat them in a best of 3. Like, oh, there we go.
Yeah, and that first half on Overpass when they went up, like they were killing them. Like they were just crushing. Even like not even necessarily just skill wise, which they were winning all their battles, but tactically, FNATIC looked confused. They didn't really look like they knew how to break that defense at all, and it showed. And they were just so dominant in that first half. I didn't expect, even without that boost, I think it would have been just like a very, very quick second half. I mean, they just looked phenomenal. And one thing that has bothered me about LDLC in the past that I don't think we saw at DreamHack Winter is they've always struck me as a team that when they start getting down and they start losing rounds and losing momentum, they lose big. Like I don't see them often losing like super close matches, but they lose big, and even in the finals against NiP when they were losing on Inferno, they lost 16-4 when they
on their best map.
Yeah, and like when they start getting down, it just looks like they kind of break down. They collapse real hard. And that's something that I think scared me in events with them in the past. But it seemed like at DreamHack Winter, everything came together and they kind of solved those issues. And even when they lost some momentum, they were able to get it back.
No, and crucially, on the other side of the same equation, that's actually something. What's funny is I made this point when I did the podcast with Lurpus, where the timeline of that was it was just after Fragbite Masters, which is the one that FNATIC looked really dominant at. They'd beaten Dignitas, they'd beaten Virtus Pro, then they beat LDLC 3-1 in the final, and crucially the one they lost was the overtime on Inferno. So it's like they were really dominant in this event. It looked like they were at their zenith, like they were the most unbeatable team. But what's funny is I even said to Lurpus in that podcast, from what I remember at least, something along the lines of like, we still don't really know what FNATIC is like made of, because at the moment they're dominating everyone. What you really need is you need someone who can push them to like a close game, like someone who can actually put FNATIC in a scenario where like FNATIC's down 12-14, and now can they like grind out the rounds to get to overtime? Can they win the game? No one was able to do that to FNATIC before. Nearly always FNATIC would either have a lead and just be winning, or even worse, they'd be down but they'd be playing T side, and they were so good on CT sides they always kind of had that fallback, like, well, as long as the CT side comes, we'll get that. And even worse, their opponents would kind of know that. So you could even see teams, the best example was at Fragbite Masters, where I think it was in the first half, was when they played Dignitas on Mirage, and Dignitas won for CT side of Mirage like 12-3. But I was in the studio, right, and you could look on the Dignitas players' faces, and they were still like, no, we could still lose this game. If you're a world-class team and you win 12 rounds on CT Mirage, you're supposed to think, like, we're almost there, boys. Like, we've got a little bit to go. Let's get this pistol, No, they knew we could lose it, and they did. They lost the game. FNATIC won. So no one had before, crucially, had ever been able to put them in that position. And listen, of any team that was going to do it, it was going to be LDLC, because they had all the tools. They have. I think their lineup's baller in terms of all the skills and the potential different things they can do. But actually, like you're saying, this is when they got it together. Now, before the tournament, did you buy that they were going to do that? Could you have predicted that LDLC was actually going to come good at this tournament?
I mean, I don't think you could have predicted they would have come together the way they have, but I think they were a pretty safe bet to be getting to the semifinals, and it's kind of like the playoffs of any other sport, where like once you give yourself the opportunity to get to the finals and then give yourself the opportunity to win the finals, it's all about how you show up. And I don't think we could have been like, oh my God, these guys are going to be lights out, but I think that there was this kind of general feeling in the scene of just people holding their breath and waiting for LDLC to show that, because they'd gotten second places so many times and they'd showed that potential, so everyone was just kind of waiting for it, not really predicting it, but just kind of like, please let this be the event. And I really think when they won it, like there was almost, after everything that happened, but like they were fan favorites. I thought, even being in Sweden, I think outside of Sweden, the rest of the world was really like, almost really was pulling for LDLC to win that event. They had the community behind them for sure.
No, I think you phrased it well there when you said like holding your breath, waiting for them to come together. That's the thing. Even when they were losing all those times, I used to say they're the only team in the world who are not allowed to be happy with those second places and to go like, well, we always finish top 4 and that, because any other team, like if you finish second or third and you're a pretty good team, you can be like, okay, we had a good tournament. Every time they would manage to come second and yet not look like they've maxed out their potential. Like there's still something wrong here. Like we're still waiting for the tournament when you get all your shit together and you beat FNATIC on this map and you get up 1-0 and you have a chance to win this, but they never did it before. So actually that's why I didn't expect them to do it this time, because obviously majors change things, but yeah, unfortunately I have like a general rule in analysis, which is whenever someone chokes and they do it a bunch of times, so I can tell it's kind of like a part of their character or some sort of problem they're having, those are really difficult problems to overcome. I know from viewing a lot of CS and a lot of sports. So as a result, since it's so hard to overcome that, by default, I'm usually going to bet that the guy will choke again next time. I know people want to go the other way and be like, oh, this time maybe it'll go well and he'll get up. I mean, from your own career, listen, I made the joke before you playing on Tech. Tech used to have some fantastic players. That guy Elude, in terms of skill, guy was amazing. He was a really good player. But on LAN, at CPL, he used to choke. It's just a fact. Like even if he didn't directly choke like he was the worst, he could never play to that level, that he was capable of outside of pressure, right? What do you think on this topic of like choking and the problems with overcoming it?
Well, the funny thing, when you say a team like LDLC trying to figure out that hump to get to like finally win an event, and it was kind of crazy because when you're constantly placing second place at events, finding that one small thing to get you from second to first is really, really difficult to do. Now, like when you look at a team like iBuyPower, who is consistently choking in the group stage, it's a lot easier to identify those problems. But like when you're choking and you're being so successful while doing it, like how do you find that issue? Because you don't want to change so much since you're getting to second. So, I mean, it was just, I don't know if it was necessarily choking, but it was just kind of, and in LDLC's case, I don't think it was choking, but it was just kind of like in those, they just couldn't find that last play. They weren't getting that individual play, or they weren't getting their star player to step up just enough to kind of break into that championship, and they finally got it. And I think it came from probably the last person I expected. I thought Happy was easily their MVP of the tournament. And I think going into that event, you would have been like, all right, if these guys are going to win, Shox is going to go big. If these guys are going to win, NBK is going to have to go huge. And it was Happy that came up huge for him.
Well, what's crazy is actually NBK did have a much improved tournament. He was a lot better at that tournament.
Yeah, he did.
Kiyoshima was pretty good. But actually what's weird is the star player name, at least, is still Shox. And what's funny is they won the tournament, but I can't say Shox had a particularly fantastic Dreamhack Winter. He was just okay. Even in the final, put it this way, if they'd have lost the final and I'd seen how he'd played, I'll go, well, that makes sense. I don't think he was that much of a factor. So that's actually something that's strange. Is that what you were waiting for? That was another thing I was waiting to kick in. I was waiting until they would play FNATIC and Shox would just have one half where he dropped 30, and at least they'd be able to say like, right, well, now we've got... That never happened the whole time, but they didn't need it in the end, amazingly.
No, and I just think, that's why I'm saying, like, Happy, he was just so consistently, like, we always talk about these in-game leaders who have trouble fragging. Like, it's hard to balance those two responsibilities of keeping track of your team and getting the kills. But not only was Happy getting kills, he was getting just massive impact frags. And that's sometimes it's what you need those impact frags. And if Shock's not going to get them, Happy stepped up huge. And that was great to see from them. So I don't think it was so much choking, but they were just missing a couple just key frags. And sometimes in Counter-Strike, it's just like, it comes down to that one kill to open up a bomb site, and in those finals against NiPs and against Ninjas and Pajamas, they got it, and that's perfect for them. But I do think going forward, if they're going to want to stay on top like that, I don't think that Happy will be the one who's going to consistently get those for him. I think he had a great tournament, but they do need Shox and NBK. And Kiyoshima, who's been playing really, really well. They need all three of those guys to find some way to step it up in their big matches, because I don't think you can depend on an in-game leader to do that consistently across multiple tournaments.
I mean, the problem with where they won the tournament, like the dramatic fashion, especially in the series against FNATIC, that was all legit. That was really great play. They actually looked like they could have even won the third map convincingly, so we'd all be saying like, wow, what a great performance. Unfortunately, though, it's the fact that the finals were so close, Like you said, they got smashed on their best map, and then on the mass map itself, I mean, obviously they could have lost that. It was like 2 match points to NiP, then it was overtime. That was really tense stuff. So actually, I'd love to say now that they've won, like now they're the best team, now they're going to go forwards, everything's going to be great, it's going to be better. But it's hard to know if they can actually even replicate that particular performance. Because listen, if it was like the FNATIC game, if they can do that again, that's great. That's like world champion level stuff. The finals were a bit shaky though.
Yeah, well, here's one other thing that kind of scares me about LDLC going forward is, you see all these top teams, like even the teams you have in your top 10, the majority of them have a strong AWPer. And I don't think that LDLC has that super strong AWPer, and I feel like you almost need one to remain at the top. You need like a really, really strong AWPer, I think. And I know that LDLC is kind of, breaking that rule because they haven't had one in a while, or I don't think they've ever had one in this lineup, but you need that AWP is playing such a big factor in the professional scene right now. And like every team who hasn't had an AWPer is all of a sudden scrambling, like Cloud9 picking up Shahzam, one of the better AWPers in North America, and then you saw NiP get Maikelele and get them an AWP. And you see all these teams finding ways to upgrade at that position, and I think it's going to be hard going forward to be competing against these teams with amazing AWPers.
Well, that was actually one of the reasons why I think within LDLC, Shox has been less effective. Because if you notice, he sometimes tries to AWP. Like, as particularly on like Dust 2 on the CT side, he'll just try and get the AWP all the time. But he's not really an AWP player. Like, listen, he can use it, as in he's one of those great players, like, versatile. But he's not like a dedicated AWPer. And so as a result, there's like a level between those sorts of players. The guy who's not a dedicated AWPer should pick his spots when he uses it. You can't just buy it for the whole half. Because the whole point is the dedicated AWPer, he really is a specialist. Like, he's committed to knowing like every angle, and if my aim's not quite on in this sense, I can go to this fallback angle. That's good. Other players, they play in a much less like thought out way with it, so they can have really bad halves, unfortunately, and the economy hit you get in CS goes really bad if you don't have the right guy with the AWP. So what you're saying there actually reminds me of something that happened in 1.6 towards the end of 1.6. This might have been after your era. I don't know how much you kept watching, but believe it or not, we had an era in 1.6 which was nearly entirely dominated by 5-man rifle teams. So sort of like 2008, 2009 era, nearly all the best teams were just 5-man rifle teams, and they just had 6 CT sides in terms of really good rotations, and then T side, you just had like quick coordinated strats. That's what you want if you've got just 5 rifles, So you can be really fast, everyone's versatile when you get to the 3v3 because no one's immobile. Really? But then the big thing was, around 2010 sort of era, was when Na'Vi became the best team this year, okay? And in it, Markelov was just dominating everyone with the AWP. And so as a result, then you had other teams, who were the other top teams, as a counter to them, had to get their own dedicated AWPer and get another really... And all it does is, it's not that you have to use an AWP, but once everyone starts doing it in terms of all the other teams, it becomes like an arms race, and eventually the metagame becomes that you have to have a really good AWPer. Now, there'll always be a counter to that, which is you can... Once everyone else has an AWPer, then if you really do go full 5-man rifles, you've got your own way to counter it. Like, you can do something other teams can't. The real question is, like, if you do it that way, you're gonna have to be really good at that weird counter, like the full 5-man approach. And obviously, you're gonna have to figure out ways to counter playing against a dominant AWPer. Like if you play against Kenny S, I don't think anyone's got an answer for that at the moment. What do you think on this topic in general? Because like you're saying, almost every team at the moment is going for AWPers.
I think that it's not so much these AWPs are so strong, but I think that versus the 5 rifle, I think you just need to learn how to mix it up. I think that's why, I put a lot of stock on these teams on really good in-game leaders, and I like, I think the teams with the better in-game leaders naturally have an advantage. Think along the lines like someone like Pronax. I think, I think there's a lot of amazingness. I don't want to say genius, but there's a lot of like really smart tactical calls that he makes and that I've gotten to see. And it's not so much always having an AWPer. Like if you have a Kenny S, get an AWP in his hands whenever you can. But if you're a team who doesn't have that dominant AWPer, you just need to switch up, the looks you're giving the other team. And just to your point, like how do you counter Kenny S? This might seem crazy, but at ESEA LAN, I thought iBuyPower countered him amazingly on season. It was the first time I'd seen a team just straight up counter him, and I thought Skadoodle did a fantastic job where he was actually getting beat in the first 2 maps of the series by Kenny S in these duels. And then on going into the 3rd map, instead of fighting Kenny S straight up, he literally just started baiting his teammates. They'd hit a site, and he wouldn't even try and clear anything. He would send a teammate in just to die, just to take Kenny S's first bullet, make the call, and then he would kind of hold that angle for Kenny's repeak, and he would beat him that way. And I think that's something that knowing, especially in the case of Titan, how much emphasis they put on Kenny S and how big he needs to play for them to be successful, that's one way to counter Titan.
To be fair, that's the key thing you said there. That's not a counter to Kenny S. That's a key counter to Titan, because they were playing with like a fucking stand-in manager dude. Kenny S was like carrying him that event. So it's true. It's actually worth giving up a kill just to kill Kenny S. Because even if you were down in numbers there, or you're playing 4v4 or 3v3, well, the other three are the ones that you can kill and beat, you know. So in that particular case, I agree. That's a great counter to Titan. Now, if Kenny S had really good teammates, I'm not so sure that's as good, you know.
Well, I mean, to get to these AWPers, like these strats that you can run against AWPers, strats that aren't made to like win you the round. They're to get you into the position to be in a. They put you in a good position to win the round out from the mid game on. You have these strats to kind of establish that early game and to counter what you think they're going to do. And then once you get into that mid round, it just kind of revolves around those individual plays. And I think to beat an AWPer in any situation, you know, you have to find out where he is. You know, obviously you smoke him out or do whatever, but you can find ways to neutralize him just to get into the bomb site. But I mean, it's just kind of hard on the other side. They're countering, you know, they're giving you different looks. They're changing where the AWPer is. And I think the general meta right now is just to pick up your own AWPer and to fight them one-on-one. You know, you see all these teams going for it with, you know, Shahzam, like I said, Maikelele, and then there's Guardian and Kenny S. And all these teams are picking up these AWPers just to literally fight each other. It's like that arms race, and they're just constantly doing battle. And I think instead, sometimes, you know, the weakness of the AWP is its close range, it's its retaking ability. And if teams instead just decide to avoid these AWPers completely, I think they could have a lot more success.
No, that's actually one thing that I have always disliked in CSGO, which is the number of people who are AWPers, even dedicated AWPers, who think to themselves, like, oh, Kenny S is owning my team. I should just go head-to-head with Kenny S every round, mid on Dust 2. It's like, no, that's exactly what you shouldn't do, mate, because he's the best in the world, and so you're, like, playing right into his hands when you do that. Like, he's now going to get, like, 30 kills. The difference is, what you should do is, you should go kill his other teammates. He might still be killing yours, but that's how you even the game up. Then at least you're in a chance still to win the game. And now if he's on T side, he still has to come into your site. At that point, you have an advantage. You know, there's ways to make it work vaguely for you. Whereas actually, there's very few people who can go head-to-head with Kenny S directly and hope to win that duel.
Yeah, to be fair, Kenny S is a freak. So I mean, he might not be the best AWPer to use an example because he can do things with an AWP that, you know, riflers would love to do with a Colt and an AK.
Yeah. No, he can break the rules, dude. He can do that at close range shit. He can
He's
entry
just one
frag.
of those players. Yeah. So I mean, if you're going against, let's say, like a Guardian or like a Skadoodle, who, you know, are great AWPers, but they're not even close to Kenny's level. I mean, those guys, if you can establish map control quickly on other portions of the map and force that AWPer, you know, to have to rotate out of the position he has, you can find a lot of success in those ways. And you know, I don't always like, you know, at some point you do have to have an AWPer that can challenge another AWPer and win it occasionally, but to base your strategies on getting into a 50-50 battle with another AWPer, and in Kenny's cases you have way less odds, but I mean, it just kind of seems it's just very much a gamble. So I think there's too much, just like you said, let's buy an AWP and I'm just gonna try and out-AWP them. I don't think that's, you know, a wise use of an economy and a half, and I don't think it's a wise use of your life, you know, considering, you know, maybe you lose it, maybe you win it sometimes, but I don't like teams that base their strategies on these 50-50 battles. I think it's a little silly, especially like on a map like Dust 2 where someone's like, all right, I'm going to grab this AWP and try and AWP them down mid. You know, that to me is just such a big gamble. You can use that AWP in so many different ways that are much more efficient. No,
Dust 2 is the best example because that's the map where I mentioned this to you because it's somewhere where famously NA teams always try to do it. The lesser NA team, who's the underdog, will always try and take that AWP battle, thinking to themselves, if I just get that, then I've got the pick early. It's like it's the other way. In that particular case, you'd probably be better off just using it as like a stationary weapon, like just have an angle on catwalk, and you're not even going to try and do a crazy shot. You're just going to, like, if he walks in front of the crosshair, you kill him, and if not, you know he hasn't gone catwalk. You know, that's a better way if you're an underdog team to use the weapon. You know. Odds of you actually dominating the really good AWPer in that scenario, pretty slim, I think.
Right. And that's just like a microcosm of North American Counter-Strike, that mid-pick. Like, if you're a terrorist and you pick up that AWP and you're like, all right, if I can just get this miracle shot through the smoke, through the door, we'll be good. We'll win this round. And that's North American Counter-Strike in a nutshell. It's just like going for the dream. They just want that miracle big highlight play to bail them out and to win. And it just kind of strikes me as silly sometimes. And you don't see Europeans doing it as often.
Well, the problem is, in the history of North American CS, even going back to your days, that was always one of the biggest problems I saw, which was that the teams who were the teams who had some good players, but they weren't like world class level, so they weren't like the complexity or 3Ds or whatever that were like could legitimately compete with the best teams, just even on skill. Too many of them got way too trapped in that mindset of like, oh, if I just hit my shots, or I missed it last round, but this time I'm going to hit it again. Whereas what they didn't realize was, like at that level, they didn't have to win the aim duel against this opposing team to win the game or have a chance to win the game. That might have been how they did it against other teams who were at their level and just try and dominate that guy in terms of skill. But actually, if they'd just taken more of like the team approach, or they'd just gone to basic things like I'm saying there, like what I'm basically describing there is, if you're an AWPer and you want to use your AWPer and you have the money and you have maybe you've already bought the weapon, but you know you're facing a super good AWPer, what I'm describing there is, versus the other guy who's in your country, you might just go head to head and maybe you get the pick every now and then, maybe you start the round. If you acknowledge that it's Kenny S or it's Guardian, whoever, and this time you're probably not going to, what you have to ask now is, okay, what can I now do to still contribute something to the team? Because if I just go mid, I'm just giving up a free kill. So is there something I can still do with the weapon that can do something in the round, you know? In the particular example I gave there, you don't even have to get the kill. You can just get information. Like, okay, they're halfway up catwalk, and if they kill you at that point, you died, but you got some information. If the guy kills you from spawn, you got no information. That he's in their spawn with an AWP. Well, everyone in the world knows that, mate. You haven't given us anything there. Like, you have to figure out ways to kind of have some game impact. It's like the equivalent of in basketball. If you're like a power forward, but you're going against some all-star power forward, odds are you're not going to score much, but you can still get rebounds. You can still play hard defense against them, you know. There's still something you can do to at least make it a little bit harder.
Yeah, and you know, you kind of brought up two really good faults in North American Counter-Strike right now. And it's a couple things that have just annoyed me that I don't know how they're not learned, but it's, you know, just those gambly plays, you know, you see Europeans do these like individual gamble plays, but one fault of North American players is when they do these, you know, they're almost like afraid, or like maybe they just think they're going to be cowards, but they always like commit to these fights. And European players will do these pushes, and if the frag or the fight that they want isn't there, they just bail out. North American players will just keep going at this fight and just like butt their heads against a wall, and they're just, some of them you're going to win and some of them you're going to lose. And then just another one is, you know, when you bail out of that fight, you're right, you get so much information for your team. Like thinking if you go halls and you want to peek into alt mid on Inferno, you know, if you commit to that fight and die, you make a call, but your team is down a player. You know, if you just bail out of that fight because someone's spotting it, you know, you have so much information available to give your team without losing your life. And that's something that I think North American players are pretty bad at right now at the moment. And the other is just, I don't think North American teams and players in general right now have a great feel for game sense. You know, I'm going to put iBuyPower and Cloud9. I think those guys do an all right job, and do, you know, they can do really good jobs too on the international stage. But some of these up and coming teams you see, like I'm thinking, like I see all the time, you know, a team will lose like 5 rounds in a row and then they'll win one. And that makes that following round, you know, for the econ impact, they don't want to reset their money. It's such a huge round to win. And you'll see a player try and make this individual hero play 30 seconds into the round, and he'll just get killed and put his team in a terrible position on such a crucial round. And the game, like, it just clicks in my brain, like, where's your game sense to understand that this is not the time to be taking that kind of a risk? Because then you just force your team to save 1 or 2 more rounds. You know, it's almost like you're giving up 2 rounds to try and make one miracle play. It's like the trade-off, it just isn't there. You know, it's just not there to make that kind of a gamble.
What you said there, like where they tried to make the hero play, that's what I always felt was the core problem here. It's like in North America, listen, on the most basic level, I could say that the problem in the past was everyone tried to be like the star player in the team, which isn't necessarily what you need or even what you should do. But even worse than that, it's that everyone wanted to play like the flashy style. Everyone wanted to be like the K-Sharp, or someone who had like or Method, someone who's just like aim first, going to crazy highlights. What they never understood is, I'll use this example now, the best team in the world is FNATIC. And on FNATIC, if you just look at the flashy stuff, you'll look at JW and you'll be like, wow, look at this, he just goes wherever he wants and he gets a 4 kill here. JW isn't the reason why FNATIC wins. JW can have an average game and they could still dominate their opponent, because the reason FNATIC's the best team is because they are fundamentally the best. They have the best CT rotations. Their best player, Crims, is literally just like a stand in really smart positions, get the smart kill, fall back to the right position, give the right call, get the next high percentage kill. Like, it's really boring Counter-Strike. I can see why people don't like him and don't think he's such a cool player, etc. But to me, I'm watching it, I'm like, Jesus Christ, like that's unbeatable if someone's really doing that, you know. Once you have that foundation, then you can put the JW guy on top, and yeah, then he can go free for all, he can do what he wants here and there. And I always thought in iBuyPower that was their problem, was like, here's a weird perspective for you that I don't think North Americans have. When iBuyPower would have that really great result, so for example, like at Gfinity, they had a really good Dust 2 opening map against Titan in the playoffs. Obviously, they had this awesome semi-final against LDLC. I always thought that they actually kind of got fucked by Skadoodle, because he was so good at AWPing that when he had that one crazy halfway, he'd hit every single shot, and he'd make shots that he shouldn't even make normally, and he'd like miss position and still get the kill. That actually made them think like, oh, this is how we're supposed to play all the time. And it's like, no, that's the outlier. If you had everything else laid down as the fundamentals, and you had really good rotations, and you had solid executes, and then you put that in, yeah, that puts you over the top, and you're gonna win games you shouldn't, or you're just gonna be very solid. But sometimes I think that sort of play keeps you in a game and makes you think it's working when it's not a high percentage kind of style of play, you know.
Right. Yep. And no, you're completely right. I think, you know, I personally love those players like Crims that are like the fundamental Counter-Strike players, you know, and I look at, you know, people like Volcano and Storm from North America on 1.6 where, you know, just fundamental players who, you know, just played solid Counter-Strike in all the situations. And I think, you know, you see Europeans do it a lot, obviously much better than North Americans, but like just staying alive. And I think that was a big thing you said about Crims that is just so crucial, is you don't have to get the kills in certain positions, you know, like you don't have to go for the second or third frag. You need to just stay alive. I'm thinking like sometimes in Pit on Inferno when they're hitting the bomb site, your goal shouldn't be to prevent them from getting in the bomb site. It's to stay alive in the pit. And, you know, you see those positions all the time, and you see North American players constantly peeking those angles when they don't need to. And I think also part of it is with the way that Go gives that advantage to the aggressor. I think a lot of North American players, especially coming from like a 1.6 or a source background, like especially 1.6, I think they have trouble kind of balancing that. When do I try and stay alive, and like when do I need to peek? You know, I don't want to like be too defensive and give up that peeker's advantage. And I think that's kind of something that we're seeing players get better at, but you still see a lot of mistakes in those fundamental aspects of Counter-Strike.
I mean, what you're describing in terms of like looking for the fundamental player, to me, the only one who really fit that on almost as good as the international level was Hiko when he was in Cloud9. Like, he really had that down. He had that like passive style, and he would just. Here's the thing: he wasn't the most skilled player, but he would have the most game impact because he'd just go for the kills he knew he could get, and he'd set up this one like, I know where my opponent's going to come from here. I know that if I'm not going to like peek him and have to like take a crazy shot where I have to scout and shoot them in the same action. I'll like hold this angle here, so I'll get the first guy. Then if I kill him, I can move up. If I can't, I'll drop back to here. And as a result, it actually made his team reasonably consistent because they know what he's going to do. He can do it, crucially. Whereas actually, the iBuyPower crowd, they were the ones who kept stacking up all these aimers and just trying to turn them all loose and just trying to have the like controlled chaos style. And that's an incredibly hard style to make it work. Like, I think LDLC does that to a degree. They have a lot of aimers and they kind of have that style. But you've seen with them, even they weren't winning events. It's really hard to make that work. It's like, because you can't, you haven't sort of decided what everyone's going to do as much, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think Cloud9, you know, just to go into these Cloud9 and iBuyPowers, now that you brought them up, their differences out. You know, iBuyPower, I always thought was the better team and just underperformed.
No, dude, their skill level, if you look on paper, their team should always have been better than the Cloud9 teams.
Right, and I think Cloud9's biggest issue and has been, you know, you say how big of an impact that Hiko could have, is how they utilized Hiko, because I always thought that he was like their best and most consistent fragger, and they always put him in these lurking roles where he didn't really get a chance to do anything until like all of his teammates were dead, or, you know, 40 seconds left in the round and he's stuck in like a 1-on-3. And you saw these events, you know, they relied so much on these miracle plays. You know, you think back to even Cologne, when I think this was at Cologne where they won. They came back against Titan on Dust 2, and they won against Dignitas and Mirage. You know, that like just that brain fart by Dignitas to allow that 2-on-4 or whatever it was retake on A, and then, you know, Titan was up 15-9 on Dust 2 and let it get into overtime. And those are things that don't happen in the professional scene. And you saw how Cloud9 was playing. They just like started thinking, I guess, that these hero plays were going to be happening for him every match, because they were. Even you go back to that ESEA LAN where Hiko wins like a 1-on-4 against Navi in the site, and you can't base your strategies around expecting that to or not. They're not basing their strategies, but you can't win events when you're constantly relying on those kinds of plays. So, I think keeping Hiko in that lurking role was so bad for them. I would have rather seen them switch nothing into it and let Hiko be like the second person into a bomb site, into a fight. I just think that he was too consistently good at fragging and aiming to leave that out of your strategy for so long into every round.
That's what tilted me about those two units that I've been watching in North American CS in 2014. You had this one team, iBuyPower, with all these skilled players, and their whole style, essentially, aside from the Face It line where the miracle happened and everything came together and they even managed to beat LDLC in overtime, every other tournament was this storyline. If the game goes close, we lose, because our whole style is we have to dominate the opponents with our aim. Because we're playing such a hit and run style, we have to front run. We have to get up big and then just cruise to the finish line. Meanwhile, Cloud9 was the opposite. Cloud9 didn't have that many skilled players. All they really had was good chemistry. And so they used to be the opposite. If they were going to win versus a European team, they would narrowly win. They'd have to claw their way there and everything would have to go right. And so the whole time I'm just thinking guys, someone over here's got some cookies and you've got some cream. They could go well together, right? If you put a bit of each in, no one eats a whole thing of cookies on their own. No one eats cream. Everyone loves a bit of mixed, though. We need to mix these qualities together. So, dude, when Hiko said he was going to iBuyPower, I was like, awesome. I can't wait to see how this turns out. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think, dude, there's some really cool possibilities with this iBuyPower squad. I would love to see Hiko get more aggressive early on in rounds. I hope they put him in positions to where he can do that, be one of the first two guys and into attacking a bomb site and going for picks. But I think also, one of the big kind of criticisms of how that lineup might play is, the Hiko and the Swag and how they both like to lurk. And actually, I was thinking about it, and I hope that DayZ utilizes them both as lurkers through a terrorist half, because I think they have two different styles of lurking. I think Swag has always been this really aggressive lurker where the obvious one is that door on cash, where he'll open it and he'll spam it and he'll peek and he'll get in these tiny little gunfights where he'll jiggle peek and shoot 3 bullets, and you'll know he's lurking there. And Hiko doesn't lurk like that. Hiko kind of stays and just watches for a push, and he'll chill until some action happens.
He sets up an ambush for you, or he comes from behind.
It's almost like a get right. He's from the get right school of lurking, where he'll just kind of lie in wait like a snake and just wait for the perfect moment to strike. But I think if they can find ways to let Swag lurk this round and let Hiko lurk this round, that can really throw people off, because I see Swag, I think Dust 2, he'll watch upper B pushes, and his teammates will get a pick on the A bomb site and cause the defense to rotate to that side of the map. And Swag understands that mid player is the guy who's going to rotate, or that second player in B is going to rotate out. And instead of staying passive as a lurker like Hiko would, he actually gets aggressive, and he's not afraid to take that one-on-one battle in that B bomb site. And if he wins that, if the guy's there and he wins it, it causes so many issues for the defense it's already rotated away. And sometimes they rotate completely out of the bomb site, and then he just takes it for free. So I think those are two really cool different strategies for lurking that they have on that team that opens up a lot of possibilities for him.
Now, I'll tell you a rule of this show. It's not really a rule, I'm making it up right now. A rule of any show that I'm on is that online play does not get a huge amount of weight. It gets what it deserves, okay? A little bit of weight, and it's not that big a deal. So why I'm saying that is, when I now ask you about this iBuyPower lineup, you have to pretend like you didn't see those MLG Aspen qualifier results, because otherwise everyone's going to want to be oh, well, obviously they're not very good, and they'll not want you to set the bar too high in case it all flops and it goes really badly. So imagine you haven't seen that, and you just know what you know about Hiko from Cloud9. You know about iBuyPower's lineup in terms of the other players you've already seen play together. When you heard about this move happen, and you know that they're going to a tournament now with this fresh lineup, this could be a world championship level team, right? iBuyPower?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it'll happen at MLG, but you look at this lineup and you look at how well iBuyPower's performed recently. You think ever since Gfinity, and then they went to Face It and got second, and even at ESEA, where they had essentially two different players. They had Nitro and adreN at ESEA, but that core is putting up good battles against teams like FNATIC. They played a really good series against FNATIC at ESEA, and you look at some of this potential, and I don't think you can deny that they have the potential to be there. And I mean, I know potential doesn't count for much. I really hope they get there. But I mean, if your question is they potentially have the ability, then I'm going to say yes, absolutely.
Like, I think this can be the best NA lineup ever in CSGO.
Yeah, easily. It can be. And you know what's crazy too is even if they had decided to keep Nitro for somebody, I probably would have said the same thing. I was really, really impressed with him at ESEA. So, I mean, they had a lot of options available to him, but I think this is the best possible lineup they could have put together. But I think you also look at where their successes and failures have come in the past, and I think what kind of scares me is you look at that trend of when they were like not making it out of group stages versus, you know, getting deeper and deeper into these tournament runs. Skadoodle played bad in all the early exits. You know, he had some good rounds or some good halves here and there, but you know, overall he really struggled in these events that they didn't do well in. And we saw the ones like, especially like Face It, he was amazing at Face It, and they got, you know, to the finals. Yeah. So it kind of scares me that they're so reliant. Apparently, it doesn't strike me in their gameplay that they're relying on Skadoodle for so much, but if you look at the events that he does well in, the events that he does bad in, you kind of see a correlation between how they place as a team, and that kind of scares me a little bit. But I mean, the potential is absolutely there, and Skadoodle's been playing consistently well ever since, you know, Gfinity and Face It. So, you know, I'm not sure that there's reason to be fearful for him to all of a sudden just drop off the earth, but I mean, that correlation is a little bit worrisome.
Because to me, what makes this lineup good is that on paper, it might sound like AWPers done the same thing they've done every time, which is recruit the best aimer that's available, put it on the team again, try and play the aiming style. But actually, that's like we've described here about Hiko's style. His style is more of a fundamental style. Like, he has a set way of playing. If anything, I hope that this means now they've got a decent mix of it, actually. Because with AZK and Hiko, in theory, you can have more of a fundamental style, more of some safer passive play. But then you can add in Skadoodle, really good AWPing. Swag, we all know he can be great at clutching and playing in that scenario. Now you've got a solid fundament there. And then Dazed is only your in-game leader, but he's actually one of the best in fragging in-game leaders. So I think you've got enough skill, you've got just enough of like the team structure aspect. Now, to me, I'll make a bold statement here. I do think this can be the best NA CSGO team ever. I think the only thing that can destroy this team isn't their level of play or like how do they fit in game. It's only the personality issues. If the personality issues are like egos constantly clash and someone doesn't want this role that he said he did before, or he gets mad when he plays badly in this new role, that could be what destroys it. I think they have everything on paper, you know. Like, if you were the GM and you gave me a team to coach or whatever, then I'd be like, okay, I've got everything. I've got my rebounding, my three-point shooting, my inside. I've got everything. Now it's up to me to make it work, you know. Now it's on me. If it fails, I have to take some responsibility. I can't be like, well, I didn't have what I needed. I didn't have resources. To me, they've got everything on paper they need, you know.
Yeah, and I honestly, I don't think there's going to be any major personality clashes. I know, you know, at ESEA, like, this was a change that was, you know, people were hearing rumors of even before ESEA event even started. And I know they had a couple meetings at the hotel at ESEA, and they talked it over, and they talked some things out. And I don't know at all what was said, but I know they all left pretty happy, and they, you know, from the people I talked to that were at the meeting, that everyone seemed pretty excited for it. So I can't imagine too crazy personality clashes at all. And I think, you know, you look at how AWPers has historically practiced in the past, you know, even when they were dominating North American Counter-Strike, you know, going undefeated and maybe one-loss seasons, they were still in servers every night dry running. They were still in servers for like an hour and a half going over smokes, talking about how they wanted to play the maps. So, I mean, Daze brings a lot to that team in terms of, you know, his leadership and his preparation for the leagues and in these tournaments. So I expect them to do really, really good things, and I think you're absolutely right. This is going to become the best North American Counter-Strike Go team we've seen yet. You know, one thing though, I want to say just on Daze, because I really like him as a strat caller, and I think he's easily the best in North America. But one thing with AWPers, they've always been like the slower paced team, and we've seen them have, you know, this common strategy that teams had in North America against them was, you know, wait the rounds out, make them execute somewhere, because they don't like to execute. You know, they like to find a pick somewhere, and they like to manipulate rotations, and they rarely ever do they execute. And we see them at tournaments over and over again, you watch they run the clock down so low, and it's gotten them into trouble before. So it's easier said than done. But if you can find ways to stay in the 5v5 or like a 4-on-4 and just let the clock run down, you're going to force them into a weird execution that they don't like to do. And that's kind of one weakness. So one thing I want to see DaZe kind of do with this team is, find some way, instead of just running that clock down, find some way at 30 seconds to hit an execute, or just to kind of like change the pace, and do like a pretty fast strat instead of just kind of waiting around. And it's something that FNATIC does so well. You watch some of these demos from ESEA that, I just know them off the top of my head because I got to cast them, but Pronax would spend like 6 rounds just having his team full-blown rush every bomb site they went to for 6 rounds. And then all of a sudden he'd switch up the pace on a team and go slow, or the other way around, vice versa. And it had so much success against teams like Titan, and even Virtus Pro kind of collapsed to the pressure a couple times. So, I mean, these change of paces, there's this game flow that players and teams will get into as a match goes on. And changing the pace like that, I think if DaZe can incorporate it, it'll be huge for them.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why I actually think like this super team sort of was formed is because of, it was like the perfect happenstance on all 3 fronts, okay? So first of all, Cloud9's been doing poorly these last few events, and Hiko himself hasn't even been playing that well in the team, so I can see why he'd be open to change, okay? He's kind of seen like the ceiling on what was possible in that team. First of all, they were there months and months ago, and now they're not even close to where the ceiling even is. So that's even more depressing. It makes you open to trying something new. On the iBuyPower thing, I think them failing that group stage was the best thing that could have happened. If they'd have made it out of that group stage, which by the way was easy as fuck, and they definitely should have made it out in second.
Dreamhack Winter, yeah.
If they had have made it out okay, and then they lost in the round of 8, they could have at least said some bullshit like, well, we made it out of groups for once, and like they could have fooled themselves into believing it would have been good. And even worse, they would have then gone to ESEA and had the awesome ESEA land. They would have thought, oh no, things are picking up, we made the right roster moves. Whereas that fucking Dreamhack Winter went so badly, I think it at least put in the minds of Swag and Skadoodle, like, maybe we fucked up there, like maybe we should have this DaZe guy in. Oh, we can have Hiko as well. Yeah, I think we'll do that move, I think. And crucially on DaZe's part, listen, he was kicked out the whole fucking team. He was going to have no sort of future. He was going to have to play in 3rd level. So if he gets a chance to come back, and now fuck all the stuff that happened with Hiko, and can have an even better team. Now we can have the dream team. I think everyone was kind of primed. It was like a bad scenario, but making the kind of compost that you can make this team out of.
Yeah, it was the perfect storm that just resulted in this super team. Yeah, you're right. And that I could not believe they didn't make it out of that group stage, man. And you could see it because it was their Terra side on Inferno that just failed them. And you could see that's all the in-game leadership. They have that steady hand, and I think they, even if they just dropped Steel and kept DaZe, they make it out of that group stage easily, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It was just kind of the circumstances just came together, and I think ESEA land, watching Cloud9 play was like almost like watching a whole different team. They didn't have that usual swagger to them, even against North American teams.
Oh no, Cloud9.
Cloud9.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. In what sense?
And they're usually this, loud. Semphis likes to get loud on LAN, and he likes to, he likes to smack talk a little bit, and he gets into it, and all the guys are kind of laughing as they're playing, and they're making jokes, and they've been known for, no matter what the situation is, you listen to their comms or you see them on the cameras, and they're smiling and joking and laughing with each other and keeping it cool. And I didn't really see any of that at this event, and it almost seemed like it was a foregone conclusion. Pretty much, I think to be honest with you, this is kind of all speculation, but just from my impression of watching the guys hang out and play at the event, I think no matter how successful Cloud9 was, even if they won it all, I think that change was going to be made for sure.
I think they knew that some change had to be made, because crucially, that was the problem Cloud9 had, okay? When I described the 2 different teams, okay, the iBuyPower lineup, yeah, they were making what to us is an obvious flaw, which is you just keep rotating super sick aimers when your problem isn't not having good aim, it's that the team doesn't work against international players and certain players are choking and the executes fail. Those are all obvious problems that can be fixed in other ways, but at least they have a solution that it's not really a solution, it's like Groundhog's Day, but they can at least think, well, get another sick aimer. Hey, we haven't tried this guy, get him into the, they can at least think they have a solution. Whereas unfortunately, the Cloud9 solution was like, oh, we have to keep these players, like we like these players, like it's going to be based on like chemistry. Well, when the chemistry then goes to shit, there's no solution to that. Like you can cross your fingers and hope. Like at some point, you're going to have to change players. And the problem for them was, who are they going to get? Because all the players you'd want are in iBuy Power. Like, Swag's not coming back probably. There's no way you're getting Skadoodle, and then even then, I don't think he's going to fit your social environment. So I feel like Cloud9 were always kind of up shit creek once this lineup stopped being good.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because they played so well together for these events, and it was almost like they got to this point where they were the champions of North America. They were holding the flag up at all these international events, and then they make these. They find that they're having they don't like how they're playing, so they switch up these strat caller to Semphis, and Semphis has that one good ESEA, and then they go over broad, and they're still playing the same way, and they know that can't last because it's just kind of like a very puggy, and then they switch back to Sean because they're getting the frags, but tactically they feel like they're getting beaten, and then all of a sudden, they go to Cologne and or not Cologne. They go to the next major. They go to DreamHack Winter, and it looked like after that month-long boot camp, they really had some cool things planned, but they lost all the fragging ability, and you could just kind of see it when they got to ESEA. They were exhausted, they were depressed, and it just at that point they just had to blow something up, and I'm hoping this change, this bringing in Shahzam, this AWPer is really going to help him out. I think that'll free a lot of things up for him, but you're absolutely right. It was just kind of written on their faces. Even when I got to the hotel, you could just tell they were going to be done after that event.
You want to hear a funny example of where Thorin says something and people think he's just being a blunt asshole and that he's just saying this to hurt my feelings and what does he know anyway? So at Face It, I was talking in the off time to the Cloud9 guys when they were already out of the tournament, okay? And I was having a quite frank discussion with some of their players, and they were asking me, oh, what do you think of this? And I was saying, I think this. And then if I'd say one comment, they'd kind of challenge me, oh, what do you think of this instead? And so I just said to some of them, I won't say which ones, I won't reveal which ones and throw them under the bus, okay? But I said to this particular player, first things first, your team, you're okay on T sides, you actually have some good T side strategies, but your biggest problem right now is your team isn't even close to good enough on CT side because you lack some skill in that sense that you can't get the frags. And so when you play certain maps, especially against these European teams, which at the time the meta was that all the god tier European teams were the godlike CT teams. I said they're just going to beat you on CT side. No, you're not going to get way more T rounds than them, and then you're going to get too few CT rounds. And the disparity is always going to be there. Okay, you're only going to win by narrow margin. And then here's the second one I said to them. Okay, this will sound like I can say it now and sound cocky, like I'm prescient, like I knew it was going to happen. But I also told them I don't know why you're in love with Inferno. You think that's your best map. It's not. You're not good on it, and you should never play Virtus Pro. You should never play Titan. You should never play any of those really good teams on Inferno because you're going to get your ass beat. And crucially, if you think about it, every one of those fucking tournaments after that, ESWC, then crucially, obviously, fucking DreamHack Winter, they got their heads caved in when they were on CT side of Inferno. They get 1 or 2 rounds or something on CT side?
Yeah, they got beat. It was painful to watch.
That was I never thought it was going to be that extreme an example of what I was saying, but that was the same thing I was saying, colliding in the most ridiculous example of that possible. And so, that was really going to be their problem. Yeah.
Yeah, that was brutal. But, to be fair, to be fair, C9 was shit in that match, and they were shit at that tournament. But Hellraisers played so good in the group stage. I was not expecting that. Well, whatever their coach did, and this is kind of the Hellraisers' issue, is they showed up, the next day in the brackets and kind of shit the bed a little bit. But they played so well in that group stage. That was their own little perfect storm, not roster moves, but they just all came together and they played how we thought the Hellraisers would look when that team first formed. And they were just, beating FNATIC was obviously unbelievable, but they just crushed Cloud9, just absolutely destroyed them. And that coach had them playing, in the past when I'd seen them play, even on Inferno, they were getting beat. They got beat with 16-0 by, basically just shocks, I think was against them in Epsilon, was it, at the previous major. And, but they played lights out. Their strategies were, in the past they had looked lethargic and they were very poorly coordinated. And they looked like they just kind of ported over 1.6 strategies on Inferno to CS:GO, and you could just see they just got annihilated. But they looked on point. They were aggressive in the right situations and they were passive in the right situations. And
but what you're really saying cool now, though, that's actually a trend of what was losing Cloud9, all those Infernos that made me say they were shit on it, because what happened with Cloud9 on Inferno when they played CT side was, in the current meta on Inferno, if you're the best teams on Inferno. When you're on T side, you get forced into playing slow on T side because all the good CT teams, they always have that counter smoke in, like when you're just about to go in at 40 seconds, and then they have the flash, and then they have the Molotov, and you have to pick your timing of like between 20 and 25 seconds of when you go into the B site, of, for example. That's the hardest one to get into, you know. On that particular scenario, the good teams can slow you down every time. And all the other teams just have to accept that, okay? Because they know if you try to bomb rush FNATIC in there, you're going to just get destroyed. Like, that's not even worth trying. Like, it's not worth running through a smoke against FNATIC. Meanwhile,
that's where Crim's plays.
Well, here's the thing. When everyone was playing, when all these European teams played against Cloud9, they had no respect for that B. They would just go, fuck it, we'll just go in and we'll throw the smokes and the Molotovs and we'll just run in, and they could just take nothing down and Sean Gares, and they just destroyed them. They picked them up, and it was fast strategies. It wasn't like slow executes. It was just running in there and just like pressuring them super hard and just killing them all straight, and Cloud9 couldn't hold it whatsoever. So I always thought if they were going to get back to their level of the past, it has to be a roster move. Now here's the downside of this, Moses. You know, in American sports, we don't do this in British sports, believe it or not, but in American sports, when you do a trade, people always talk about like who won the trade, who got the better side of the trade. Cloud9 did not come out of this trade scenario very well. Like, no. Even if you like this Shahzam guy, yeah, he can be good in his own right, but what he's adding to Cloud9 isn't making up for what they lost, and it's not making them better. So I think they're in bad shape now, dude.
Well, here's what's scary about it is it kind of masks that the issues they have a little bit without actually solving them, because they don't have that player that they're going to make lurk. Having that dominant AWPer, like, he's the AWPer that they wanted, and they picked him up, and he's an aggressive AWPer. He likes to entry frag with his AWP, so he's going to make it seem like they're being more proactive on the T side. But I mean, he's not. He might look better, but it's not really solving any of those issues they have. They still have been really poor at trading frags lately. They've still been really poor at even making any headway into bomb sites, and they still seem like they just kind of get bunched up with no clue of where they want to head to into the late round. You know, like I'm thinking like Dust 2, like they just get bunched up on Cat and on that mid Xbox, and they don't really seem like they have a plan at all times. And I think having Shahzam with, you know, they're going to be able to do things they've never been able to do in the past. So it's going to look like they've made these really cool strategic changes because they have this AWPer and they have all these new things they can do. But it's not actually solving their issues, because I really do. I think they lost their best fragger, so they're still going to be missing out on frags. You know, Shahzam is a good AWPer, but is he going to be able to consistently be putting up the frags that Hiko is getting? Because I don't think he will.
Nah, it doesn't seem likely. Oh, just based on what we've seen so far, he hasn't got the pedigree. You know, he hasn't got the experience. So if he does, then it'll be a bit unexpected. Like, his level will have raised a bit. It'll have shown us something, but we haven't got anything to go off at the moment.
Yeah, and that's not to bash him. I thought he played, you know, really well on ESEA LAN, but I mean, are we going to see that, you know, on some of these bigger tournaments where you're not playing in a hotel, in like a hotel, you're going to be on the big stage, and there's that whole pressure situation. And then he's going to have to be going up against the best AWPers more consistently, and like better teams and better teammates. So, I mean, he has some promise to him, but I just don't think that it might look good to begin with, and you know, I'm always wary of these new teams because there's always like a honeymoon period, I feel, with teams, and that's one reason I've kind of tried to, in my brain, stay away from passing judgment on even the new NiP lineup. Is there's always this honeymoon period when you get a new player that everything is just kind of clicking. It's just kind of magical how for like maybe a month after that it just kind of works, and then once after that month passes and that feeling starts to fade away, that's when you kind of get to what this team is actually going to be like with their new player.
You want to hear my theory on why that is? I've got a classic Thorin theory on why that honeymoon exists. And here's the key to it, Moses. Here's where I go with it. Here's where I go deep, okay? It exists exactly in the name. It's like a honeymoon. You know the reason why when you're in a relationship with someone and it's like a really good relationship, you know the reason why it's awesome to begin with? Because you're so enamored with them. The idea of the relationship and the idea of them is so wonderful that you haven't fully gotten to see like the harsh reality of them, okay? You haven't got to see them at their worst. And so what happens is, initially, when you're so in love with them and you're enjoying your time so much and you want to spend more time with them, you're going to be incredibly accommodating. And so you're going to do whatever they want, and they want to see this movie. Oh, I don't mind seeing that. Even though in your mind you're like, oh, I don't want to see Bridget Jones. Oh, no, I don't mind. Yeah, if you want to see that movie, you know, you'll make all these accommodations. But the problem is, that's not you. Like, you can't be that guy forever. Eventually, yeah, you could listen. You're going to adapt to them a bit, but eventually they have to be able to live with you, and you have to be able to live with them as you are. Now, in the CS context, my point I'm making here, because I think this is very real. is when you bring a new player into the team. Unfortunately, in CS, one of the big flaws we have that as a sport, it'll never be the same as like basketball. Because in basketball, I can literally look at my team and go, okay, I lost this player. That means I'm going to lose 8 rebounds a game, and he plays this side of the floor, and he defends these sorts of players. I can now literally go and find that sort of player if I want. I can scout someone, or I can get 2 players that are going to make up the role, and do this then the other. In CS, because of the fact that like everyone plays different positions on different maps, everyone has like a different role on a certain map. No one's has like just one set role that you can recruit for. In general, you can't really do that. So what I think happens is, in the honeymoon phase, what will happen is, oftentimes, the guy you bring into the team, if you do it right, you usually give him his roles that he wants, okay? Because you want to give him a chance to really show that he's good, and he's good from other teams. So you give him his good roles, and he gets put in good spots. But usually that means someone else who maybe already had a more comfortable spot for them gives something up a bit. They like, okay, you know what? You can play inside sight on B. Listen, I can play rotator. Don't worry, I'm okay at that. And it's true. In the short term, you won't mind playing that. And maybe that's even your second or third best role. But the problem I think always comes is the honeymoon phase only gets extended if you win. If you win, it's not a problem. Everything's going fine. The real problem comes, it's that one game you have where you've had a couple of bad games in a row as a team, right? You've lost games you shouldn't lose. And crucially, the guy who you've now put into the key role that used to be your role, he has a really bad game and maybe even fucks some up in telly. Now, this makes you now think, well, we're losing. I'm playing not as good myself because I'm not in my role. Now he's playing like shit in my old role. Now you know what the next thought is, obviously. Why don't I get that role back, Like, I mean, I've exaggerated a bit. Obviously, not every single one's like that, but I think that's sort of a factor in these things. Initially, you make it look better than it is. Like you're saying, you give it everything, but eventually, it has to work on like a level where everyone's comfortable in their role and everyone knows what they're doing. What do you think of this theory?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, and I think even to take it, even a step, in the other direction, maybe my feeling always with the honeymoon period is it forces the entire team to pay attention to how they're communicating, and everyone's trying to put this new player, make them comfortable, and find out how they're going to play. So everyone's communication is on point for that first little while that you're practicing with this new player. Comms are on point. Rotations come a lot faster. You're not, you're more willing to forgive mistakes. So you're going more by instinct and just kind of learning how they play. And I just think that everyone's focus is so much more in tuned, and because you even see honeymoon periods like I know you're not an avid actual player, but when I go into like a deathmatch, if I switch my resolution before I hop into a deathmatch or hop into a server, I'll have like 3 days where I'm just a god on a new resolution.
I've got another theory for you, but keep going with this. You've just sparked another one. Keep going.
Yeah, like if I play, you could play one resolution for like 3 months, and then one day you're just like, all right, for some reason things just don't feel right. You switch it up, go up to like a higher res or lower res, or just switch it up, and it almost just like your brain just automatically keys in as like, whoa, something's fucking different. I gotta really focus. I gotta really pay attention. I gotta, figure out what's going on here, and you just play lights out, and it's just like this honeymoon period and everything in Counter-Strike, whether it be your settings, how you change them, or there's players, and it just kind of, it fades pretty quickly. So, I mean, you really got to be wary about kind of how you want to judge these teams, but I would love to hear your theory on this.
Okay, so you sparked another theory. This is another one that I've got over the years. It's along the lines of what you're saying here. So the best example, okay, as a CS player, and we all know pro players who are trapped in this cycle. The guy who every 3 months he has to tweak his sensitivity a little bit, like he tweaks it, or he gets a new mouse, part of the reason why that works, and it does work, by the way, when you get the new mouse or you tweak your sensitivity a bit, the reason why you will have games afterwards where you think, by the way, you're not actually having better games, but you'll think you're having better games, is because let's say you put your sensitivity up. Now suddenly there'll be some scenarios where you actually manage to do like a spin 180 and get to the guy and kill him, where maybe if you had a slower sense you wouldn't have gotten there. So you'll get a kill you wouldn't have gotten. And crucially, now you'll even hit shots with your aim that'll be crazier than you would have when you had the lower sense. But the real problem is, you're not actually better, you're just hitting other shots that you couldn't with your old sense. Now here's the obvious part where it kicks in, is after you've played enough times, you realise that there's some give and take there. If you're hitting shots that you're going to hit more of and crazier shots and you can spin more, etc., now maybe you're not as consistent with the standard shots that you used to get, so maybe you're missing some of those. And what happens is eventually you realise, in general, like, no fucking sensitivity is going to make me a better player. Like, all I've done is like slightly shift the emphasis of my game a little bit there in this sense. So sometimes it might even be wrong for you. You might have a high sense and maybe you are like the Crims sort of player who's obviously just like crosshair positioning, you're not like flick shots. And so I think that's also a factor in teams, to use the same analogy, which is when you bring in this new player, you might even be willing to try new things. You might be willing to try this, or maybe you try playing a higher tempo and you do this sort of thing. But the same scenario as with the other Honeymoon aspect. When it starts to go wrong, or when it starts to, that's working, but now some other aspect that used to be your bread and butter of like, we used to do this and it always used to work, isn't working. Now the same frustrations come up, and it's sort of like, unfortunately, as humans, you always tend to want to go back to like the thing that worked the most in the past. Like once things go, you're willing to try new things, but once it's shit, you sort of like, let's just go back to what we did before. Yep. And in the case of the teams we're talking about now, Cloud9 particularly, the big problem I see for them is you can't go back. Like the world they were in the past was a factor of things like, for example, a lot of the European teams had different lineups that I think made a lot of them more vulnerable than they are now. I think the European team scene at the moment is really well structured, actually. Nearly all the teams have the best sort of lineup they could have, pretty much. So I don't think Cloud9 can go back. There's no way to go back to. They have to change. So actually, here's my bold statement, okay? If I look at the team they have now, I agree with you. I actually think the Shahzam guy, I don't think it will be his fault if the team fails. Like, I think he can be good, and he can even be like a revelation in this team. Maybe he can even be a much better player. I wouldn't bet on that. I'll just say he'll be good for now, okay? I think he'll be good in his role. He'll get some AWP frags. Their biggest problem to me is still going to be lack of skill overall in the team, and what's like approach are they going to use. And so to me, if I was the general manager of Cloud9, the move I would make wouldn't be get rid of Shahzam. I actually think the move that I would make would be I would get rid of nothing, and I would bring in Nitro. What do you think of that? What do you think of my bold move there?
No, I've said the same thing in the past. I think.
I mean, it's a gamble, but I could see an upside to it.
No, there is definitely, because Nitro, at ESEA showed, he was really good at entry fragging, really good at. I mean, he just played an all well-rounded LAN, but I think that's a good move if they're going to play the same style they have now, where they like to pop flash nothing through smokes. They want him to be like an entry fragger, so they have him do all this crazy stuff. And if they're going to do that, that's a good move. But I mean, if they're going to switch up their style completely in general, I'd rather see nothing move to more of a lurking role, and I would bring in Nitro for like Semphis or Sean. But if they want to stick with,
that's also viable. The big problem there is I get the sense that, and okay, the only way I could see that actually being allowed to happen is if, unfortunately, I think Sean Gers is at like 5th Laren status in that team now, where the only way he's ever going to be removed is if he chooses to sort of fall on his own sword and be like, you know what, guys, I'm going to retire now. Like, I'm fine with you getting someone else. Like, I'll become a coach, or some bullshit like that. Unfortunately, because he's like the nice guy who everyone likes, and everyone in the team seems to be like the anchor between them all that they all like. I get the sense that he won't leave. Now, listen, maybe they could kick Semphis. The problem is, if I had to pick between the two, that's where the problem comes. Like, which one do you pick between? Because on one hand, I actually think that Sean Gers is the better fundamental strat caller, but I also think his skills, his performance has been pretty bad the last few lands. I actually think that Semphis, in a weird way, in the past lands, I actually thought his style of Poggy style had worked better. It's just not a long-term strategy. And then if he's just an individual player, he's probably not good enough on his own individually. So I agree. I think if we're not just doing the straight move I said, that I think they actually might go for themselves, because I think I could convince them to kick nothing, put it that way. But I don't think we can convince them to cut each other. But if we did, which of the two would you go if you had to choose?
Between Semphis and Sean?
Yeah. If you had to pick the one for the good of the team, for the good of the realm, Moses, who will you choose? God. I'm like Varys now of Game of Thrones, Although you look more like him. I'm more like Littlefinger or something,
All those bald guys look alike, huh? I would pick Semphis, I think.
And just go with real strategies, real executes, and then we're going to put Nitro in his position.
I said earlier, I put a big emphasis on in-game leaders for a lot of reasons, but I also think, and I like Semphis as a player. I thought, for a while he was on my list of the most underrated players in North America. I thought he wasn't getting the attention he's deserved in these last few events. He has been underperforming, but you can say that about, everyone on that team has been underperforming. Even Hiko these past few events was just like something's not right there. But going forward, I would pick Semphis, and I would move nothing to a lurking role, and I think that they need Sean. They need that in-game leader, because one of the reasons why North American Counter-Strike is so bad is we don't have in-game leaders.
Because everyone wants to be the hero, dude. Being the guy who sits behind telling everyone, and then do this, and then I did all my homework. No one wants to be a Poindexter. Here's the weird... I've got a weird theory for you again, Moses. I've got so many of them, bro.
I've got a cool theory, too, so you go first.
Okay.
I'll go after that.
Here's my weird theory, okay? in Europe, like, yeah, a lot of gamers are like nerds and that sort of scenario, but we're like happy with being nerds. Like, we've accepted that we're nerds. Like, yeah, we're the guys who stay up till 2 a.m. we play games. Like, we're not trying to be cool, okay? But in North America, even within the pro scene of gamers, there's still like people want the swagger of being sort of like a jock of gaming. Like, they want to be like, I'm not a nerd. Like, yeah, I beat you with my skill, and I matched you using a lot of shit talking. So as a result, you don't get the positive side of being a nerd. Like, the best part of being a nerd is having some Pronax type dude who's a fucking Poindexter who may as well have like glasses and a pocket protector. He's like, I came up with this strategy for 2.7. There's no one like that in NA. Like, that's not cool to be dry running shit in a server and watching demos.
Oh god. Yeah. You're right. And you know, I don't know if there's ever such thing as a jock of the nerds, Ben, or so what you're going with.
Like that. I've always said to Lurpus when he was in NA, I used to say to him, the big problem isn't that there aren't these players that you need in the teams in NA. It's that, okay, so for example, someone like a Fiflaren, the difference is if Fiflaren exists in North America, he will never get into a top team. They will just look at him and go, he's not skilled enough, he's not good enough, like, give me some aimer instead, you know. And so he'll never get into a top team. The difference is in NA, someone, okay, here's a European example. So someone like Twist or one of these players who has a lot of skill but he's not in a top team, who's like maybe like the 10th best aimer in Sweden. In NA, he would have had his chance in the top teams, and he would have always stuck around. And if he left the iBuy power level team, he'd go to the denial level team. And then if he had a good LAN, he'd move up to the, you know, all the aimers keep circulating and being recycled. Whereas some of the other players who can do some of these other things, in-game lead or give you like a utility role, just to set up how an execute's going to happen, those players don't seem to get through because it's like skill prejudice, I think. What do you think on this? You can disagree, by the way. I don't mind.
No, I mean, I agree. I just think, you know, it kind of circles back. I just think that it's not even so much like these great like tacticians, but like teams just don't understand, you know, we keep recycling all these players in North America because there's not enough experience, not enough game sense for players. And that's just kind of the big issue with us. And, you know, we do need those nerds. We do need those people who are going to sit down and understand how rounds and how halves unfold. And, you know, my theory on this situation is I think CGS just like, it was like the great Jedi purge of North American Counter-Strike. You look at like the some of the players that are playing in like NiP, and they all got to go under that school of Karn, and they all got to learn how to play from the best. And, you know, they were these great individual players, and they got to learn how to play the game from some of the greatest players through 1.6. And then you look at the North American scene, and we had all our star players from 1.6 and Source converge into CGS, and then none of them came back to Counter-Strike after that. Everyone was just like, fuck it, I'm done. And we have all these players who were, you know, stuck in those rotations of like, you know, the main, like the lower tier leagues, and, you know, the 10-man pug all-stars, and they all of a sudden got thrust into the limelight as the best players, and no one actually learned how to play and compete properly in Counter-Strike.
Well, I've always said what's funny is the best example is Nothing. Because Nothing went from being in like the 6th best team to like top 3 instantly. And unfortunately, because of all these star players leaving, he was instantly thrust into like, you're the best player now. And so I've always said with him, it wouldn't have mattered in 1.6 if the CGS hadn't happened. Okay, it wouldn't have mattered if Nothing had these problems that he's had with not always being able to perform internationally, because he would have never been forced to be in position to repeatedly fail. He'd have either gotten it together and he'd have fixed whatever it was, or he would have just had his chance in a top team and then he washed out, you know. Because they weren't there, it's like he was in the top team and he was giving he was forced to try and do the same thing over and over and over again. There wasn't alternatives, you know. There wasn't another star player guy you could bring in who even had the upside to do that. So you always had to gamble on Nothing again. Let's try it again with him. Let's hope he can do this position instead. And there's truth to this. Unfortunately, it's not only that you cut out the top scene, but it's kind of like you took away like the final bosses that the other guys have to beat to get to their level, you know. Instead, they just automatically, they've won the game on like easy mode. Well, not easy mode, like normal mode instead of difficult.
Yeah, and you didn't just take out like the final boss, you took out like 10 of them. Like, no one came, like none of those 3D guys came back. None of, you know, the Cole guys are shadows of their former selves. You know, they went back to 1.6, but even then they just kind of, you could see it, just they weren't quite in it in their later years. And I just, you see it in how these are played. You almost see these plays that you expect to be made in a pug or a gather or a 10-man, and they're being played at like the professional level in North America. And, you know, it's finally starting to get weeded out. Like, we're finally starting to see people kind of give up on that. But it's just taking us so long to catch up because we have these players thrust into this limelight. Like, and you said it, that whole thing with nothing getting thrust into stardom, like just immediately because of this exodus of players that we had. And then you mentioned it earlier. Everyone wants to make those flashy plays, and like, who's flashier than the plays that nothing makes? Like when those plays that he makes go well, they look freaking pretty. Like they look amazing, and everyone wants to fucking do that. And it's like not everyone can do that, guys. Like slow down, everyone take a step back. And I really think that that's a huge issue. I think just in fact. I was glad talking to Pronax when I heard him talking about. I got to talk to him at ESEA Atlanta, him and Devil Walk, and they were talking about watching demos, and I was really glad to hear that because I think the art of demo watching and the art of learning from demos is really dying out, especially in North America. Like I think there's so much to be gained from watching demos that players. I don't know of anyone outside of like Dazed and Sean that watch demos. And maybe this is why I like Sean so much, because I really do like Sean. I think, his skill isn't great, but I think he, after every, like, he gives interviews after they've won some matches in the past. I'm thinking like Titan on Dust 2 at Cologne, and he's always, he's like, yeah, we watched a lot of demos, and we kind of had a feeling they were going to do this. So when I saw this flashbang come out, I knew what was coming, and I called out the rotation immediately. And you could just see how well they countered certain strats that were made, and I really liked, because he said that in multiple interviews. You can hear it. He's like, yeah, I watched this demo. I know these guys like to do this, so we were prepared for it, and we were looking for this smoke to be thrown, so we knew what they were doing, and that's cool. I like that, and he is one of those demo watchers, and I love that shit.
No, but actually, when you mentioned that there, I don't know if he does now, but I know in the past, that's actually something I used to give Semphis a lot of credit for. Because crucially, when Cloud9, or they were called at the time, they used to just be stuck in NA, and they used to play like 2 or 3 tournaments a year when they'd get to come to Europe and the ESEA. So they didn't play many, they may have played 5 tournaments in a year. The difference is, all the other NA players sat around complaining, saying, oh, we don't get to play in Europe, we don't live in Europe. And then they would just, maybe they'd watch a game or like from a European tournament, but they'd watch it like you'd watch The Simpsons. They'd sit back and they'd just watch it, They weren't watching it like you'd watch a demo to pick it apart. The difference is actually, Semphis actually used to watch those demos. And if you asked him a question about what does Very Games do on this, he could tell you. Now then, I actually think that maybe he went away from that, because I know that he would still have good scouting info when I talk to him. But by the way, he also, I don't mind throwing him under the bus in this sense, because we have that sort of relationship. But he also would say some ridiculous shit to me. Like one of the reasons he said that Inferno was like such a good map for them is that he was one of those guys who thinks that he has certain strats, certain scrimmy strats, and he would say crazy things like, if it works, you'll never be able to stop it. Until you've beaten it, you'll never know how to beat it. Which is sort of like, are you trying to like sell me some sort of fucking crystal from the East here or something? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? That doesn't exist in Counter-Strike, bro. Like, yeah, there's things that are hard to adapt to, but you're like creating a mystique around your bullshit scrimmy strat that like you're going too far with it, okay, bro. And unfortunately, that mentality leads into the idea of like, well, it almost doesn't matter what the enemy does. Like, it doesn't matter what their setup is, because if we do this right, then it's going to work. And by the way, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because every time it doesn't work, when you try it, you go, well, we didn't do it right. That was the problem. It wasn't their setup. It wasn't that they countered it. We just didn't do it right. Like,
yeah, someone screwed up.
Yeah, you can say that every time, dude. Every time you lose a round, you could say that. You can't have that mentality.
North American Counter-Strike is like the kings of self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, I see, all those times Cloud9 used to come back from international events, and I'd be like, well, we have to spend the next 4 months here in North America, and we have to play against these middle-tier North American teams, like, and, they don't know how to play Counter-Strike, so we're never going to get better this way. We have to boot camp, and, if that's your mindset going into scrims, no matter who you're playing against, then yeah, you're not going to fucking learn anything. And, I always respected iBuyPower because they played every scrim like it was a match at an event. They played how they played in matches in scrims. And Cloud9 always got a little bit of a scrimmy attitude to him, especially, Semphis, it's well known, he sometimes just kind of shuts down and then likes to get into those scrim modes and just start rushing everything. But, I mean, when you're in that situation, you're either going to find a way to get something from your practice, like playing against other invite teams who at the time weren't as skilled as Cloud9, but you have to find some way to take something from it, or it's just going to be completely pointless. And then you're exactly right. But it's your team that makes it pointless, and this is something that has implications in all the invite teams going on right now. Is these guys like to make we like to make excuses when we scrim each other as to why we're not winning, or why another team's winning, or they're doing this and they would never do this on LAN or in a match. And it's like, it doesn't fucking matter if like that's your mindset. I have a lot of talks with some of these old school guys like Volcano and K Sharp, and we're just like, these guys mentally in North America have not gotten it quite yet. And I say that like I'm probably going to get blasted by a bunch of people in North America, but I think there's a lot of talented players, but mentally that competitive edge that you need to have in Counter-Strike is not there with a lot of these teams and players.
So I've got a question for you then. This is going to sound like... you have to realise, like 99% of people watching this, there's no way they can know what the fuck we're about to talk about. When I ask them about questions in like 2003, there's no chance they could have watched it. And even worse, the demos probably don't even exist because Godfrag is not... They can't even go and watch it. But what I'm going to ask you is... Isn't this something that literally happened during your days when you came up in this team United 5? Here's the background for people who don't know the context. It was you and your brother, and you were kind of like one of the stars of the team, and you had Fraud, who was the main AWPer, and then your brother was the in-game leader, and then Trip was kind of like, he was kind of the support player, the kind of guy who plays his role in the strategy, and then the fifth guy was just a rifle guy. What was his name?
Slick,
that's it. He was just a decent rifle, okay. So this was the team, but crucially, you were able to overcome, at least for a period of time, Team 3D. And the thing with Team 3D was, this was like an all-star team. All they did was get all-star players, and if one all-star player was playing bad, you get another all-star player. Get whoever you want. Get Volcano, Bombs, Method. People who, in every other team, they would be the best or second best player. And they were just stacking 4 or 5 of them together. But crucially, I actually know, because I used to be friends with their in-game leader, Moto, that they actually used to be in the mentality of what I'm describing here. Like, they used to really think, oh, since we've got the best players and like we know what our strats are and we think they're good, it doesn't matter what the opponent does. I don't even need to look at them. And in fact, Moto's line in interviews always used to be like, if we play our game, it doesn't matter what the opponent does, which is such a naive old school way of thinking, because actually it's both. You have to know your shit, and your executes, but you also have to know the other guys to tailor it to it, to know how to counter that and to know what might be a great strat but won't actually work against this opponent. And instead, he kind of got trapped in that loop of like, if you lost a game, you would just think, well, we just didn't do our strat correctly. And the reason why I say this is because wasn't your brother a guy who was poring over the demos and he was trying to find every little tendency that a team had in this way? Am I exaggerating it a bit? Am I being nostalgic?
I mean, just in the sense that we didn't at that point in time we didn't counter strat teams so much. I don't think there was much countering other teams back. At least in North America back in 2003, because 3D with Moto was one of the first teams to really have great tactics, and then we were kind of the second team that came up that had that was known as a strategic team versus skill. So there weren't really a lot of things you could take away from some of the other squads, but we poured over. When we were coming up and we were in main and we got moved up to invite, we didn't watch North American demos, but we picked a European team. My brother and I would sit at home and we'd watch, 3 demos over the weekend. We'd watch a bunch of demos, and we kind of found this team. It was you'll definitely remember. It's Team 9.
Yeah,
it had
Veslin's
like
team.
Veslin, Quick, and Swift.
It was a really sick tactical team.
Yeah, we picked them, and we pretty much stole a lot of strats from them, and then tailored them to our players. We would switch a couple. We would dry run these. We would watch this demo as a team, and back then, round timers were like 3 minutes long. So we'd probably sit and watch a demo as 5 people, just all of us sitting and watching the player whose position we're going to play, making calls of us. So we were the one that were playing it, and we would do that for like an hour and a half, however long the demo took, and then we'd go dry run for an hour and a half, and we did that once a week on every map, and then we would practice and dry run and practice and dry run every day for the week. So we didn't anti-strat 3D specifically or any teams, but we thought that they were the best team tactically that we could.
No, that's the key thing you picked there. Is that actually you got a good memory. That was. Here's what people don't know. That team didn't win most of the events. The team that won was SK at the time.
Yep.
But SK was like the NiP of their era. They were like they had the stars and then they had the loose style that fit the stars. The difference was the Team 9 team on paper had much inferior players at certain positions. Some players weren't close to the SK level, but they could compete with them by having better strategies. That was their focus.
Yeah.
So if you were a team coming up and you want to play versus all these stars, that's the team to take from, actually.
Yeah, and I still think, and I say this as objectively as possible, but if someone ever finds that demo is United 5 vs 3D on Mill, and I still think that my brother Hare probably put together some of the best tactics you'll ever find on Mill. with how we utilized our players.
3D's CT side was terrible on that half. Like, famously, I remember at one point Moto just started going in the fucking sewers every round and getting like killed there. Stuff like, on CT side of Mill, you never need to get killed as the CT initially. You never have to peek anyone. It's a perfect map for just sitting on corners, and the enemies have to come to you. And their team was terrible in that half.
Well, here's also why is, it was such a weird. It's so weird to think about it now, because with the round timers at 3 minutes, like, we think about how aggressive Counter-Strike is now on the defensive end on the CT side, but back then, 3 minutes, like, you don't want to move anywhere, because the terrorist team could just sit and wait for a minute and a half. And we actually, we took about a minute and a half to clear sewers, like slowly checking every angle. And I remember it was my brother 9 sewers every round, and actually there was an article written about Moto in the sewers on Mill against us.
It was me. I wrote it, mate.
Was that you? And it was like, I think there was even one online match after that where he went like a combined like 3 and like 20 something.
He kept going there every time and fucking dying.
Yeah. So, but I mean, even I think my brother, just those strats that he made for that map, he just exploited them so well. And it was just, I don't think that we would have lost to really any team on that map, to be honest. I think that was one of our stronger maps. Absolutely. We had Fraud at the time, who wasn't the star that he was known to become. It was probably his first or maybe second CPL, and his op was just kind of starting to heat up at LAN, and we just like cut off the entire map. And that's one of the cool things that AWPers can do, and you can see it sometimes in Go, not as much with how mobile you have to be nowadays, but with how strong these smokes are. But you can see AWPers will just cut off like half the map. And and that was one of the first real maps where you could do it on, because like you could hit one site and no one would be able to cross that middle line against Fraud, because he doesn't miss a shot. He's not the fastest guy, but he's not going to miss. So I don't know, it was just cool. And I just don't think that anti-stratting back then was huge, but it's kind of, I think a lot of those like genius. It's funny because I really think that Pronax is the best in-game leader in Counter-Strike Go, but the strategies that he's developed, that I see those like little sparks of creativeness and like the things that make you go like, holy shit, I can't believe they're actually, this is how this strat is working. And they're so much different than how they used to be, especially from when round timers were 3 minutes long, but even after that when they went down. But I think Pronax is a really, really, really amazing things on their T sides.
I mean, my favourite, and listen, I already know I'm going to get flamed for this, because at the moment he's playing like dog shit as a player, but Existence is my favourite, the guy from Titan, because if you notice, every era of Titan, it doesn't matter who the players are, he finds a system that works with his players. I mean, this last ESEA LAN was like, yeah, it's true, Kenny S was carrying them like insanely hard. But even so, the amount of T rounds they got was a fucking masterpiece when you consider how crap their lineup was. Like, literally, 2 or 3 people in their team were playing really badly. Admittedly, the guy's a manager. I don't blame him. He hasn't played professionally in like a year or something. But in general, they had people. They shouldn't have been able to win any of those games. They shouldn't even be close to beating FNATIC. But they could get T rounds, man. If you have an in-game leader and the other team just has a guy who plays the role of an in-game leader because he has to, you can always have a little advantage. You can always have at least the mental advantage, even if you don't win the aim battles,
Yeah. I went up and talked to Existence after. I thought, specifically from, if you ever want to learn how to play T-side of Season, you watch that Titan iBuyPower match on Season. They ended up losing it, but their T-half, I thought was so genius. Once again, this genius might be overstated, but I don't really have a better adjective for it, to be honest with you. But it was so good the way they utilized Yorick, who was the manager standing in. And like, I don't know if they specifically chose him to be their lurker because he hadn't played, because they just wanted to get him some easy kills. But the way he manipulated how big of a map that was, and manipulated the rotations that need to come from the CT side was so cool to watch, because Yorick was he had Yorick in like 3 different positions throughout that half to just cause so much damage. Even sometimes he wouldn't even get a kill, but you could see he won him the round because he caused so much delay on these huge rotations. They couldn't even go for a bomb site retake. So I told Existence, I was like, that was one of the best halves of T-side halves of Season I've ever seen. Like, I just thought it was amazing to watch.
Well, that's one of the key factors of an in-game leader. is that if you're an in-game leader, it's like the discussion I was describing about certain AWPers who are like utility AWPers, but they can't go head-to-head with a Kenny S. You have to find something that the guy can do in a round. The idea is he can still do something to contribute to our win. So in that particular scenario, they literally had a guy just standing in who's not going to be a pro player again. I mean, listen, he's not trash. He was a pro player a year ago, but he's going to be really rusty. He's not going to be at the level of FNATIC, for example, or like really good aimers, etc. So as a result, if you're a good in-game leader, you figure out something that he can still do within the strategy. He can still contribute somehow. We can have a chance to win in that sense. That's why with the really great in-game leaders, if a team really can't get T-halves, I do always look at the in-game leader first. Same way as in like a real sport, you look at the coach, you know, like are you able to use your star players? Are you making the right decisions and stuff? But there's a certain point in time where if the coach is really proven and the approach is correct, eventually you have to start blaming the player if he can't do his job, you know. So actually that's why famously in the Titan lineups, I always used to come down very hard on Scream, because I think if you look at all the players Existence has played with, in general he's been able to make nearly all of them work, and if not, he can tweak it eventually to get them to work. But Scream always had some sort of problems, and I actually think if you've looked at his career, it's just a problem with Scream. Like he can't find the role, or he can't do the role he thinks he can do entirely that way, and so I think his problems will continue out of the team. So I've got a North American example for the same scenario, which is that I don't blame Sean Gares or Semphis for Nothing's problems, because I've seen that they've tried everything. They've tried putting him in this role and telling him to do it, and then they've tried, he says he wants to do whatever he wants. Okay, try turning him loose, try letting him do whatever he wants, let him go where he wants. They tried doing that, it hasn't worked entirely. So at some point, eventually you have to look at Nothing and go, what can you actually do, mate? What is your role? You have to pick a role and you have to be able to do it, and you have to be able to be consistent with it. Like, it's one of my biggest pet peeves, and this is another North American thing, by the way, is where every player who's good in North America, but he's not actually at the level of like a godlike European rifler or AWPer, all you do is you don't say, well, he's not as good. You just say, well, he has consistency problems. It's like, you know what happens when you're consistently not as good as someone? You're just not as good. That's how averages work, mate. Like, right. you can't use, there's certain plays you can use that for. A good example would be like Skadoodle. He clearly can be incredible, but has certain times where he's off mentally, or he just does weird choices, you know. He plays too passive sometimes when he's being beaten up by another AWPer. That's like an example where I can believe there's a real consistency issue there. When you look at someone like Nothing isn't inconsistent. Nothing actually plays that way consistently. He plays like every now and then he gets a few kills, then he has some rounds where he does nothing, he runs in and just gets killed blind through a smoke. Like, that's just Nothing.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of know what you're going to get. And, you know, it kind of sucks to say that, but because his just, you know, I honestly think that he would have been out of this team. And that might be...
If they'd have had options,
might be a little crazy.
He wouldn't be in Cloud9 now, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, but you think back, I think that he would have been gone a couple ESEA lands ago if he didn't have that monster game against Virtus Pro.
Yeah,
where in that
best
of 3 he dropped like 80-something frags or something like that. But I think after that, I think he was kind of at the end of the line, and they were just like, well, can't really drop him after that performance, can you?
I think he also got saved by Swag going to iBuyPower. If they'd have still had Swag in the lineup, then he would have been next on the chopping block. You know, like he would have been the guy where they'd have then thought about removing him for Shroud. That would have been the move then, you know. Like, that's the gamble, or take a Nitro. These sorts of guys, the difference is he would be the next one in line, whereas Swag leaving, you wanted to gamble on Nothing. So he still has some skills. You wanted to just see what you could do with him.
Here's what's crazy about Nitro, though, is he was on no one's radar.
No, he hadn't played like a match until like fucking October or something ridiculous.
Except for Swag. Swag was the one who was like, this is the guy I want. Like, I want Nitro on this team. And that's the entire reason that Nitro's on that team, because I don't think anyone else really was like looking at these players and was like, all right, who's some young talent we can take a gamble on, and I don't think Nitro would have been one of them, except for Swag. And I think it kind of, you know, it'll be weird because I think Swag really kind of started putting his mark on that team as a leader. He kind of like took it over with that roster switch, you know. Once Daze and Seal left, he kind of felt like the leader of that team, and now that Daze is back, I think that's kind of a weird dynamic. But you know, just keep on going on Nitro. One thing I loved about Nitro's story was, you know, this progression of young players making an impact and getting opportunities in the professional scene that we normally see is normally them just dominating or playing like super well online, and they get that online stigma to them, and they get that like, oh, he can't do it on LAN, or let's see what he's going to do at a tournament or on LAN, and blah blah blah. And then they go, and it's usually the, you know, the pressure of being at a big tournament, the pressure of having to perform weighs them down. And Nitro didn't have that pressure, because he didn't show us anything online. Like, no one, it was kind of just like, huh, they picked up this guy, really. And he went and he played average. He didn't play terrible. He didn't, he had his matches where they got killed and he didn't look great. And the match they won, he looked all right. And then the match they lost, he looked inexperienced. And then he comes back to ESEA and just dominates. Like, there's not another word for how he played. He was winning 1-on-3s. He was entry fragging. He was getting 2 mid-round frags to open up bomb sites. He did everything for that team at ESEA. And to see that amount of growth from Dreamhack Winter to ESEA in that short of a time, he just took that small 3-match experience he got at Dreamhack and turned it into that monster performance at ESEA. That's really, really cool to see. And that's really exciting. And it is kind of a bummer that we don't get to see him on a top team, but someone with that much skill, he's not going to be held down forever. He's going to have good things going on.
That's why it's bullshit that Cloud9 didn't at least think of it as an option, because the difference is you could at least before have said, okay, you only had half a good LAN, like maybe if you're on a bad ESEA team, you only beat some team I don't care about, or you're only good online. But no, he actually had a performance where, listen, it doesn't mean that he's here already, he's arrived, but it's like it's really promising. It's worth a gamble, And I've got some news for everyone who watches CS:GO, but they're from North America. Okay, odds are you probably don't watch League of Legends or some other game like that, right? They're two different games.
Do.
Okay, you do.
I love League of Legends.
Well, in League of Legends, in the competitive scene, the exact problem you're describing exists in League of Legends. So in League of Legends, tons of North American people play League of Legends, but they say the exact same thing that Cloud9 and iBuyPower have been telling me for the last 2 years, which is, there's no talent in our country, and none of them are proper players. They all just play stupidly online. The same things they say, and you know the reasons why? Because they've created that scenario. Like anyone who becomes good online, they say that same thing. Oh, well, he's only good online and he's just a bullshit player. And if he does well, it's like, oh, well, it's because I don't try when it's online, and online I'd beat him. Well, yeah, because you've got a better fucking LAN teammate that's full of experienced players and he's got a bunch of nobodies that have never played. So what's funny is in North American League of Legends, all these top teams actually, to some degree, some of them dropped off because they never picked up the talent. And so the other talent all got together and just overtook them. And so actually the best team now in North America, Cloud9, is nearly all players who existed at like the level below the top teams, just got the right mixture together and overtook them all. And so here's the thing, the same thing that's not going to happen in North America, because unfortunately I don't think they've got the right mixture of players there, but there definitely are always players in the North American scene who could be good. So think of what we've seen this year. If I'd have gone back, and I've done this in the past, and I'd have talked to Cloud9 in like March of this year, they'd have told me, oh, there's no good rifler, there's definitely not any good like AWPer out there that I could get, there's no skilled player essentially. I can get some player who's good online, he's like scrimmy and he's just bullshit, but they would have told you that this didn't exist. And yet what we now know is Shroud was sat there the whole time. Nitro wasn't even on anyone's radar, and he was out there and could have been found to some degree. Like there's not like the openness to find these guys, and there must be more of them. I'm pretty sure. Like, listen, I know mousespaz have only won these best of threes, and I made all those comments before. I'm sure at least one of them's probably good. I'm sure if they get a few lands under their belt, we'll figure out that one of them can do this role or could play in this. I'm sure there's talent there. It's a ridiculous mindset to imagine there isn't, right?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and it's just a matter of, I mean, you saw these leaps of faith, but like, with Shroud spent a season online dominating, and they just kind of took a gamble on him. And that's sometimes the way it has to happen. Like Fraud back in the day was purely online. Like he was
online as fuck before he got in your team, dude.
Yeah,
he was the guy who used to play like K-Sharp online, and then offline he would choke,
I had like 3 when Godfrag was around. I had like 6, 7 forum posts like favorited as like motivation leading up to CPL. That would be like United 5 and Fraud. They're the most online motherfuckers. They're going to crash and burn. And I would just like look at it every day before practice and just motivate. And I went back into every single one of those threads and posted in it and just kind of like did ha ha ha. But you can't, this online stigma like is not something that should be holding these players back. And I think that's something where, I talked earlier about having that mental edge that these players just don't seem to have, is everyone gets called online before they do good on LAN. Like
it's the progression of things. That's the hierarchy. I've always said it starts with you have to be good online to even get noticed, because you haven't been to a LAN. Then you go to a LAN, you do badly, you join the 4th best team, you get one upset result, then you get your shot on the good team, and then you have to go to the international. It's like there's the ladder you have to climb.
Yeah. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that's actually good. Like you're getting noticed. Like keep it up. Play like that. And then it's simple, not necessarily easy, is just you have to show the same stuff on LAN. And like it's simple to say, I mean, Shroud didn't show what he did online on LAN, but he showed that potential. He showed the same intelligence, the same play style, and maybe he missed some shots here or there, being nervous or whatever it might have been, but they saw enough of his potential to pick him up and take a gamble, and it's worked out for him.
I will say this though, Moses, I have to break in here, which is that I agree with you totally. On a sports level, that should be all you have to do. But I'll tell you a reason actually why, now I think of it, why I think someone like Shroud got through the system there and he did get his chance and they gambled on him. But some of the other players who probably are as good or could be as good if they had the right team won't get that chance. And this is an NA problem as well, which is Shroud, if you know his personality, he's actually quite a quiet guy. He's not going to talk shit. You know, the shit talking holds young players back because they don't realize if you have we're talking about fraud here, dude. If you're like fraud, if you're being online as fuck and everyone knows you haven't proven it on LAN, then they're waiting for you to fail because you've talked so much shit on them. And the second you fail, they won't think, well, give him 3 more LANs and he'll be good and I could pick him on my team. They'll think like, oh, good, you failed. You're shit. I told you, don't ever talk shit to me, and they'll be biased against you. So if you're an up and coming player, number one rule is just zip it. Like, show it with your play, show it, like, have your awesome online results, yeah, but don't talk shit to, like, Semphis, because then you're never getting on Cloud9, I can tell you that right now.
Well, I mean, Semphis and Shahzam didn't always get along. I mean,
yeah, but now Semphis' back was against the wall, exactly.
It's out of desperation.
And he's like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
He's like, everything is forgiven, please come to me, I need you.
Here's a good topic, though, is that when we talked about recycling of players, man, the difference is, if you take a chance on Nitro, you're not recycling an iBuyPower player there. He barely played an iBuyPower. You're recycling someone who, really, you're just taking another chance on him. He's got some potential. We've seen maybe he's got more to offer. A great example of where fans, I think, are really naive is, as soon as iBuyPower got Hiko, there were lots of fans like, oh, I hope that Cloud9 gets adreN. Like, listen, adreN is a good player. He's a serviceable player. He can call strats. He can do a little bit of AWPing. We know what adreN is. He's an entirely known quantity. We've seen what happens. Unfortunately, he is a player who's been one of the ones who's had a tendency at the international lands, like the majors. He has been one of the guys who choked, unfortunately. I don't know why. I don't know what got to him. But as a result, the upside on adreN actually isn't that great. It's decent. Like, listen, if you have all the aimers already, I maybe would get him into my team. But if I was Cloud9, I'd much rather gamble on like a Nitro type guy over the adreN type quality, because the ceiling's going to be fairly low if you get a player. Do you have the same sense for it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. You do know you're going to get with adreN, and he has shown like a consistently, just like Anger. For whatever reason, those two players, Todd disappeared at this last ESEA LAN, Anger did, and adreN I thought he played really well for iBuyPower actually throughout that tournament, and then once they got to the loser bracket finals against FNATIC, he, outside of some, a flashy 1v4 clutch and a couple rounds here and there, he largely just disappeared, and I think that's kind of been a trend out of those two players, is in those big matches, they tend to fade off more than they tend to rise up to the occasion. And, I mean, absolutely, you give me the choice of adreN and Nitro, I'm taking Nitro every day, and I'm freaking happy about it, for sure. I've never liked this recycling players argument. I don't like watching people do it, because there's a reason why they're recycled, and yeah, it might not be fair to some of the younger guys, but when you're playing at this level, you have to go with known quantities. These gamble chances on people like Shroud and Nitro, they don't happen very, very much at all. No,
they don't work that often. Here's the thing, though. I think
it's insane.
I think you should only get another player like that when in its own merits it makes sense. Now, you don't get them just because, well, we need a player and they've just kicked him and he's the best player of the ones that are available. That's not a good enough reason in its own right. Like, for example, if adreN wants to keep playing, his situation now is ideal. Go to one of these teams that don't have the veterans and be the veteran, and then you've got young aimers. And listen, maybe you discover an aimer in your team. Now you've got a decent team, actually. Maybe you can beat Cloud9 and become the second best team. That's actually your way back, It's not, but recycling in that sense, if you literally just take an adreN from iBuyPower there as a stand-in and put him straight into Hiko's spot, that's recycling to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just to build on that, you're right. adreN's position is perfect not only for him, but for that team. With the amount of young talent that they have on it, people are all, Nitro obviously, and then they have the Fugly and Nafly who played some pretty good tournaments, and they have Daps in there. But adreN to be coming in with that veteran experience, like coming in and understanding how to compete against the best players, he could do massive things for that team. Because, I mean, I'm going to tell you that at ESEA LAN, there was all this hype surrounding these Denial guys. You know, they took Titan into overtime, lost 16-14 on the next map, or 16-13, whatever it was, you know, beat Cloud9. But all this hype surrounding them, and we said at the beginning, you know, you kind of look back, you know, like a month later, and I looked back on ESEA LAN and at Denial specifically, and I was like, you know what? It wasn't really that impressive. They had a month and a half to prepare for Titan. You know, Daps even said that they watched every demo they could find on Titan on Inferno. You know, they counter-stratted, they anti-stratted, they made a game plan, and they executed it really well, which is all great, but they still lost.
That's the problem, okay? They had the tournament of their life, and they didn't win. So
right.
What's the upside there? You just had the bust upside you were going to get. Right,
and then they barely squeak by an Elevate team who had just a series of its own, is just having struggles, that whole squad, and all those old 1.6 legends just having their own tough time and go, and barely squeak by those guys, and then barely beat a Cloud9 team that, frankly, looked like shit. So, I think adreN can do really well. I think looking back, their LAN wasn't as spectacular as it might seem. Showed some promise and showed some good progress that they made as players and as a team. And I think adreN can come in there with that experience that he has, in that AWP, you know, help mitigate the departure of Shahzam. But with his experience, most of all, I think he'll be able to pass on a lot of game sense and a lot of knowledge and be able to slow that team down and get them more tactically into it.
So if we've talked about all these teams, we've got to talk about mousespaz now. This is the part of the show where we're contractually obliged to talk about mousespaz.
Let's do
it. Now, here's the thing about mousespaz. Even if you go to ESEA LAN, and maybe you're a team who are onliners or something, you at least get that like warm-up match or the match in the lower bracket. You can always at least get one series win in theory, right? You can never get totally blown out. Their problem is they've just qualified for a tournament where every other team there in theory is really good. Like you're not going to there's no easy game at that tournament. Like you're playing NiP, LDLC, FNATIC, iBuyPower. I mean, listen, Cloud9 might be the only one who's like the weak spot, but everyone else in theory, if you're not good enough, they're going to beat your ass at that LAN. What do you think mousespaz's actual chances are? Do you believe in them? Do they have the potential?
No. They have a lot of issues, and you know, it's actually funny. You talked about, you know, Elude early on from Tech and how good of a player he was online and couldn't translate it to LAN, and it's not because he necessarily choked. It's not because he was a cheater, but I think this emphasizes what mousespaz's issues are going to be. Is his play style back then was geared for online play. You know, the types of plays that he wanted to make do not work on LAN, and it's the same thing with mousespaz. How they play as a team and some of the fights they take individually are going to have a higher success rate online than on LAN. And, you know, one of the cool things about those guys is, you know, Tarek streams a lot, so I was watching Tarek stream during their entire, you know, run against iBuyPower in the finals to get that qualification, and they are like one of the most disorganized teams I've ever seen in my entire life. You know, at certain points during the rounds, they had 3 to 4 guys calling strats, and they have some amazing talents with Tarek and PTR played so well, but strategically, when you get to these LANs, you know, if you have 3 to 4 people calling out strats and everyone's a little bit nervous and you're playing on stage at the X Games, like, some people are going to listen to this guy, some people are going to listen to this guy, and it's going to be a clusterfuck, and no one knows what the hell's going to be going on, and I'm very... They're going to implode, I think. So, no, they don't have a chance. You know, I think they need an in-game leader because there is some talent on that team. You know, Tarek played really well at the SIVA LAN against other North American teams. You know, Hayes has shown some good things in the past, and Cutler's one of those guys who's never he doesn't really blow up, but he's always consistently getting, you know, his 20 to 25 kills, and they need an in-game leader to kind of lead that team, to kind of slow them down, get them organized, because you need that on LAN. And some of these fights where they just want to get into a battle, they want to find a gunfight, and when you're going against the best aimers in the world, you're going to lose that more than you're going to win it if it's not like a coordinated attack.
Yeah, I have the sense that, unfortunately, like I said, the only team I could see them beating is possibly a Cloud9, but the others, I have to figure the others are going to kick the shit out of them. Like, it's the first big line in this sense, with all this pressure and facing all these good teams. It's hard to see how they'll overcome that. In terms
one of the
of
things one of the things I like in some of the forums afterwards, it was like, you know, someone asked Tarek on a stream, like, what was like, how do you guys feel going against the Europeans? And he was like, oh, we're really confident. And you're going to say that. And one thing that I just thought was like, that confidence is good and you need it, but when you get your shit kicked in 5 rounds in a row, that confidence disappears so quickly. And it's the organization of the team structure that you fall back on. We talk about having to know muscle memory when you're peeking angles as to where, the guy could possibly be and how you're going to flick to this angle if you catch a pixel there. You need to have this kind of muscle memory within your team where you know where people are going, what they're doing, what they're going to throw, and this team doesn't have that. And they're just going to find themselves in positions where they're missing something to take a bomb site, and they're just going to get stagnant, and they're just going to get flanked, and they're going to die. And one thing Europeans do against these lesser skilled North American teams is they don't respect you until you earn it. So they're going to put on so much early pressure, so much aggressive peaks, some crazy plays, and they're just going to out-aim the shit out of these guys. And that can snowball so fast. And if they're not prepared for it, they're in a lot of trouble.
So, okay, actually, this draws us back into the topic we originally started, which is Dreamhack Winter. So, after seeing ESEA LAN, and you saw FNATIC there, and, okay, they had some shaky games. They had close series versus Titan that they barely won. Then Virtus Pro actually were pretty convincing in the first series they played them. But then in the final, I mean, that was like a stomp right there. Like, they just convincingly beat Virtus Pro. 4 maps in a row, and they won the tournament. Is FNATIC number 1 team to you still?
Yep.
So are they favourites to win this event? Should they continue their streaks? Well, I mean, it got snapped overall, but are they going to continue winning events? Are they the number 1 favourite to win this event, do you think?
I haven't seen anything to dissuade me from picking them as my number 1 team going into this event. Even before we had that streak of like 4 tournaments at the end of last year, or at the end of 2014, and I honestly thought that FNATIC was going to take home gold all 4 times. And, LDLC came together perfectly at Dreamhack Winter, but everything I saw out of FNATIC, I think they have such a good mixture of players, and each of their players is so adaptable, and Pronex has such a good feel for how his players like to play and how his team wants to play, and he switches things up. You can never catch a read on him. Some rounds they have Olaf Meister opping, and he's a completely different style from JW opping, and this fast pace to slow pace to fast pace to slow pace. I just think FNATIC and Pronex, they're the way they're playing at ESEA and just even before that, it's just like too good to stop. I mean, you saw LDLC basically get beat by them, and they had to come together and have this perfect storm to the point where they could beat them at Dreamhack Winter, and that's hard to beat. You to go against a team like Virtus Pro and have to beat them 4 out of 7 games, that's nuts. Like, that's just absolutely insane.
No, I'm on the same boat. I still think FNATIC are the number 1. Now, I have to say, what gives me hope in terms of that they won't just own everyone is the LDLC series. If LDLC turn up like that again, then listen, it'll be an awesome game. I'd love to see that match again. A proper even battle between them. That's true. LDLC have a chance. The really crazy thing about that ESEA LAN, like you were saying there, is to win 4 maps in a row versus Virtus Pro. Like, I think Virtus Pro are kind of like a bit misunderstood. I always describe them as, for me, okay, I'm not sure where to put NiP because they only had Dreamhack Winter with the new lineups. I'm not sure where I put them yet. But before Dreamhack Winter, I had it like this. FNATIC and LDLC were the clear 2 best teams to me. Like, one of them 2 has to win all LD events, okay? But after them, the Virtus Pro's in their own category. And they're sort of the elite one. Like, if they had the perfect tournament, they could win. As you saw, they almost won ESEA in theory. But the difference between them and LDLC and FNATIC, there is a level, but as a result, Virtus Pro are sort of like the gatekeepers to like the elite level. Like, if you can beat Virtus Pro in a best of 3, then you can win events, you can be a world champion now. Because the point is, no, you're not going to do it. Like, you could beat them on a map, but in general, you're not going to beat them in a best of 3. Now, listen, NiP did do it, but even NiP had moments where it was going to be hard, and that's part of why, because the thing with Virtus Pro is, part of the reason I think they have problems against FNATIC and LDLC is LDLC and FNATIC are better on certain maps that Virtus Pro like Mirage or Inferno. But the thing about Virtus Pro that I think is very underrated is their map pool is fucking ludicrously deep. Every map is dangerous versus Virtus Pro. It doesn't. So for the teams above them, it's true they can beat them because they can beat them on their best maps. But the teams below Virtus Pro, every map that Virtus Pro can beat you. So it's going to be incredibly difficult. Like, that's something I have to give NiP props, that they did win the best of 3. What about, obviously Virtus Pro won't be at this tournament, but NiP will. Now, do you buy that NiP will be the same sparkling team at Dreamhack Winter? They'll just come in the same form and they'll blow everyone away and all the NiP fanboys will rejoice and NiP has returned?
I don't think they will. No, I mean, like I said, it's tough with that honeymoon period with this new player. We've only seen him get to play that one tournament, but I don't think they will. I think that NiP still has some issues that I think kind of got masked by Maikelele on the team with DreamHack Winter. And, this might seem crazy. Like, just in my thoughts, I was trying to figure out, like, what happened with NiP, because it seems like this flip got switched, and even when they won the major, like, it didn't feel like that they were the best team, but they still won it, which I think is actually a really cool story and really amazing.
Yeah, it's a good movie. If it wasn't real life, if it was a Disney movie, that's the ideal storyline.
Well, we always talk, in any other sports, some of the greatest players who play the game always find ways to win games and matches that they shouldn't win.
Yeah, sure.
And I feel like that's exactly what NiP did, and that's just a testament to how great they played at that event and how great of a team they are. But, I mean, outside of that, and even some during that, I feel like NiP got to this point where they became too structured into the roles that had been defined for them. Like, when they were outskilling everybody, you never knew what they were going to do, and they were going to beat you in a one-on-one fight no matter where it happened across the map. And once people started catching up in skill, I feel like you kind of could read NiP better, because you knew that somewhere on the map Freiburg was going to go for an entry, and he was going to have like a teammate supporting him, but he was going to go for an entry. GetRight was going to be lurking somewhere, and no one was really making any moves until Freiburg went from that entry. So you stop that entry, and then NiP's in a tough spot. Then it puts something on GetRight and Forest to make it happen, because Zist makes plays, but not usually to open up sites. I don't really see him doing too often. It's usually Forest getting in a duel or GetRight lurking the shit out of somebody, and they're both so good at it. But I've always thought for like the last few months, if Freiburg has a bad game, that team's in a lot of trouble, and I think he's really the key to their success.
No, I have a similar feeling. Like, I thought DreamHack Winter was like amazing in its own like movie storyline, like the new lineup, and they got better and better as every round went on. Listen, that's a great movie script. Problem is, in real life, the movie doesn't just keep replaying every time, and you don't just keep getting better and better and better. And so
right.
My problem for them is, first of all, as a team, I don't think they'll be like as magical. I think they can be good. Like, I think they could be like the third or fourth best team. Like, they could be scrapping with Virtus.pro for that third spot. But first and foremost, their problem is that at this next event, both LDLC and FNATIC are both there. And if they get into a world where LDLC and FNATIC don't play each other beforehand, then you can get stuck in a world where you might have to beat both LDLC and FNATIC to win the event. Now listen, maybe if they have a great series, they can beat one of them. I don't think they could beat both if they have to play them. That's too much to ask. And then in terms of players, I think the player who I'm most worried about is Maikelele, actually. Because he was the guy who got progressively better as the tournament went on, I thought. Like, GetRight actually played fairly lackluster, even though they got to the final. Like, he was a bit like Shocks. The star names, but they didn't really do fucking anything in this tournament. In the actual final, though, by the time they got past the Virtus.pro series and into the final, Maikelele's level was, like, I think way higher than he can maintain. I don't think he can keep doing that every map. Like, he can have a map like that. He's an AWPer, but he's not going to hit all those crazy shots. He's not going to open stuff up like that. So once you take that away, what have you got? Like, yeah, listen, Freiburg played awesome in that tournament. He was very, very good. That was part of why they got so far. But I think Exist's still a bit shaky sometimes. GetRight's been, that guy's been kind of MIA the last few events. And then Forest was kind of like, he'd either have a brilliant round or he would just do nothing. Like, I think their team still has some fundamental problems that weren't just Fiflaren. Fiflaren was a problem, but he wasn't the only problem, and there were bigger problems.
Yeah, and they definitely, I think, have a lot to work on. And I think you're right. You exist. I still am sometimes kind of confused about what, I don't know, like, what fights he likes to take. I don't see him like, he never strikes me as someone who's like being proactive. I know he's like their leader, he's their strat caller, but he's always just kind of like supporting Freiburg or watching some zone on the map, and I don't really see him like actively doing like, I don't know what he likes to do during the rounds. I guess that's the best way to put it. I don't know, because GetRight, on Inferno, he likes to lurk calls, he's going to lurk in the boiler, he's going to do something, he likes that area. Forrest is going to look for like a one-on-one gun battle, and Freiburg's going to look for an entry kill, but I don't know what Exist likes to do.
The thing is, I also think Exist overperformed at that event, because here's the thing about Exist, he's always been clutch, right? Like, I feel like he's a guy, him and Freiburg, to me, are like the guys where, like, they're just like gamers, like they're the big game players, Like, listen, obviously GetRight in the past was, because he was like the genius of CSGO, he's the best player, but his form's been off. The differences exist, I think, covered up some of his problems by looking good, like winning 1v2s at Dreamhack, and like, oh wow, he's doing so great. But in terms of like what you're saying here, his role in the team, I don't know what it is in terms of like, it's not effective, put it that way. And likewise, in a similar fashion, what you're saying there, it's true. A lot of the game before was actually predicated on Get Right because he was so phenomenal at that. But here's the problem with Get Right: is his skill. Listen, his skills can definitely be really good. He can still be a top class rifler. He can still have game impact. But I always used to say in the past, what made him like a godlike player was that he did like we're talking about Kenny S when we're talking about morphing there. It's that he does the shots that the normal really good players do, but then he does the stuff that shouldn't work. Like on paper, you shouldn't be able to run in as an AWPer into the arch on CT and the B bomb site arch on Inferno on T side as an AWPer and get a kill. That's why you're supposed to get killed immediately by the CT waiting there, or you get flashed off, or you get smoked out. Like, you don't do that as an AWPer. The fact that he can do that is like, that just shows how good his level is now. Get Right used to do that. He used to lurk in the same spot every time, and you'd know he was there. And you'd know, well, I shouldn't turn away now because he might be there. And you'd be like, well, it's been too many seconds in the round. I have to turn away. And that's when he'd come out, like he was almost like he did have a wall hack, you know. So that shouldn't work. You shouldn't be able to get away with that a million rounds in a row. And the fact that he did before is like great, but it's not going to work forever. Now that style isn't that effective anymore. And I still think, listen, I think he can reinvent his game and he can find a way to be effective. And I think he can even still be a world-class player again. But the old NiP style, like what we were talking about Cloud9, they can't go back in time. It's not that they've got a problem that they have to fix, that they used to have fixed before. It's that the thing before used to work and now it doesn't work and now you have to fix it. You know, you have to change it.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, just to build on that, you know, Get Right these last few months has just seemed like a player who, like, he has so much skill. Like, that doesn't even need to be talked about, but being the lurker in that, if you're gonna like define yourself in that lurker role, and that's gonna be what you do on every map, your ability to affect the outcome of the matches relies on your teammates on the other side of the map being able to get kills and being able to force CTs to have to rotate and to have to move and to have to adjust their defense, to be able to find those gaps and those seams and how they're defending bomb sites to really be effective as a lurker. And you know, even in the past, you know, like even when they were so far ahead skill-wise, even in like some of the old Very Games matches, you could see them, Get Right would be stuck in these like 1-on-3s and 1-on-4s, and he was just so much better than everyone that he would come out on top, or, you know, almost like bring it down into a 1v1 more often than not. And now that everyone's kind of caught up in skill, you know, you really need your team on the other side of the map to be effective, and I think that's kind of where they're struggling, because if Freiburg, that's why I think Freiburg's such a big, you know, big player for them, is if he's not getting that entry kill, you're not forcing rotations. So Get Right, then his opportunity to have an impact is lessened. So yeah, I mean, I just think those guys have got to find some way, and I think Maikelele is going to be a big opportunity with that op. And you're exactly right. You know, he looked shaky in the beginning part of the tournament. I wasn't super impressed, and then in the finals he really heated up. And if he can even, you know, get to like 80% of that level, like he can be a force. But they need to find some ways to kind of change up what they're doing and alter it and get him into the game to help open up rounds for him.
Like when I said that scenario, like when you were saying there about Get Right winning like the 1v4 and the 1v3, what's funny is a lot of these, this is how you know if you're doing analysis right, is that some stuff that you won't understand then, if it had a fundamental reason behind it that was logical, eventually one day it might make sense, or you might understand what that meant, you know. So I used to always say when Get Right was the best player, that what made him amazing was that he won the impossible 1v4s. He won the ones that you're not supposed to be able to win because they can trap you in a position, and they can, the first guy is coming on behind you and he's supposed to kill you, but Get Right would somehow win these ones. Well, that's why they were impossible. You're not supposed to win them. So eventually, unless you're like unless you just are like the god of the game that's never going to be bad, eventually one day you're not going to be able to win those anymore. And what you're saying here, part of his style, think about this. This is another factor I always used to say that made Get Right incredible, because there always used to be a debate, right? Believe it or not, in the early CSGO, people used to debate whether Forest or Get Right was better. And to me, I always said Get Right was better, not just because of the stats and all those wonderful numbers he put up, but because look at the role he was playing. Forest is in the role where if you're a star player with sick aim, that's the role you're supposed to be in. You're being set up to get your kills and to dominate with aim, right? Get Right's role usually isn't the superstar player, and crucially, no other superstar in the whole world is like the best player on their team from that position and dominates in general. Like you'll have a hard time thinking of a team where the lurker gets the most kills and dominates the whole game. In general, as you're saying here, the lurker's like a middleman type of guy. Like he's like a trigger man to either set off the attack at the other site, or the attack happens at the other site, and because they draw enemies away, he backstabs them. He relies on his team to a degree. Now, GetRight was so exceptional, he could he could sort of circumvent that for a while. He could get away with dominating from a position you shouldn't be able to. So, I mean, I think they probably have to keep him in that role because it's his most famous role. He probably does have a lot of like game knowledge of what to do from there. But that's why I pointed to Exist as someone I see as underperforming, because if Exist isn't doing his job and he's like the third guy into a site, or he's over there with Forrest and Freeberg or whatever, then that doesn't allow GetRight to do his job. Now, because you didn't get the entry onto the site, now GetRight comes along and they're waiting for him. They have no reason to leave. And not only that, they know if GetRight stays, he's on his own. So now we've got two people sat here watching him. Like, it's not going to work. You can see how it breaks apart there.
Well, and you could even draw parallels to that with how, Cloud9 and how they like to play. You saw some of the same things at him where, Hiko's put in that same position as GetRight, and his team fails an attack, and he's left in a 1-on-3 and a 1-on-4, and, he's won a lot of them. But you can't rely on those, and if NiP can't make it work, then I don't see how Cloud9 is going to make it work. You just kind of see those the similarities between those two teams, and it kind of makes sense as seeing as how they were like the only Cloud9 being that even in Cole and Quantic were always battling each other, and I know those guys have talked about how they like to base a lot of what they do off NiP. So I mean it's just kind of something I think that those two teams have kind of resisted a shift in the meta where teams are almost more fluid. There's not this structure of these defined roles. You have to like take this certain. You can't just wait around and be like, all right, this is where we do X, and this is where we do Y, and this is where we do Z. You have to just kind of wait for your opportunity and take it, and you have to have teammates who are ready and understand the game sense of the round. And those NiP guys.
Yeah. Do you have a point?
Yeah. Well, the NiP guys have that game. I don't want to say they don't have the game sense to do that, but they just seem so structured at times that it just kind of breaks down somewhere. And with all this CT aggression, it's really hard to coordinate these kind of things, I think.
What sports do you follow? Do you have a key one you follow? Do you follow the NBA, the NHL?
Follow NBA.
Okay, so
pretty decently.
NBA is a pretty good one to give the example for here, which is in the same way. If you're like a godlike player in the NBA and you're like at your position, you're really, really sick, you can also break the rules of how basketball works. The rules of how basketball, like in a computer simulation where all players are equal, the way basketball is supposed to work is it's a game of trying to hit the open man with the shot every time. All you're trying to do is pass and cut in a way that the defense follows you and one guy is open, you get the ball to him and he takes an open shot because that's the highest percentage shot. If you have a godlike player, though, if you have Kobe Bryant, if you have LeBron James, actually, sometimes the correct play is just to let them isolate and do whatever they want. Because even though that's not the fundamental, right way to play, they will get a better shot than even a player with an open shot, or even a player who's the worst player having to go one-on-one. Whatever the position is, they can sort of break the rules of the game. And sometimes, if you have that player and he's in his prime, it makes sense to do that. You do just go to that guy over and over again. You let him work. You let him do it here. And in fact, that might open up other aspects of the game. Like GetRight being godlike over here opens up another player to have an easier shot later. In the same way as like LeBron can open up another player. But the problem is, if those star players aren't as good, or you don't have star players like that, the correct role is the team approach. So it is to have ball movement. It is to open the game up. It is to have quick coordinated attacks that throw the enemy off. And in this same sense, in Counter-Strike, that's going to be the approach. Like if you don't have the godlike star, like if Freeberg's totally on his game, you can just let him go to work. And we know he's going to be the entry guy, but he can get the entry kill. The difference is if your team isn't working in that sense, NiP didn't, I always said this, NiP were the best team, but they didn't play Counter-Strike the way it's meant to be played, like the way in a simulation you'd play it. Like a very games type team play it, like they have an execute and you know what this guy's job is, and if that doesn't work, you can switch him out and put someone else in. Like, I think NiP has to change their style. That's the thing. It's not just player underperformance. GetRight isn't going to become 1.5 times better and they'll be the best again. Exist isn't going to just come to life. They have to actually change their style. Kind of like what we were talking about with Cloud9. You can't just put a patch on it with an AWPer and then hope that it's fixed.
That's a band-aid, yeah. It's not going to actually fix the problem. I actually, that style that they have, they do need to change something, but they need to keep that. And I think they need to just develop something to go alongside of it. They can't just run that 30 rounds in a row. That kind of started 15 rounds in a row and a half. I talked about one of the reasons why I think FNATIC is the best. I went on about it. Pronex, the way he calls strats and he switches things up and he switches the pace. I saw a round where JW just went out one round and he got 3 kills with an op and they win the round and he comes back into spawn and Pronex has him pass the op off to olofmeister and then olofmeister goes out and gets 2 crucial frags with the op and it's things like that. These styles.
Crucially, that's impossible to read if you're the terrorist. You don't know. Think about this. I don't know what map it was, but let's imagine it was Inferno. Okay, let's say JW got those kills at let's say he peeked out of the boiler room area and he just got them all close range and killed 3 people. If he then throws that AWP to Olofmeister, who plays in B as the rotator, and he peeks down banana, well, you're not expecting Olofmeister to have an AWP there. You have no way as terrorists, and in fact, normally you're going to think to yourself, well, we just died to JW, let's go to the other side and work there, So actually, it's going to totally throw you off. But that's an example of how dynamic calling works on CT side.
Yeah, and it's not even just that. You think about all the different levels of it, and they see, they just got destroyed by JW's op in A, and then they go over to B, and Olaf's got an op, and they got destroyed by that, and they're like, all right, these guys are running a double op setup on CT Inferno. Let's just go quick and just fuck them up. And then they run straight up mid and into a double stack on the porch, and 2 Colts just spray them all down. And it's just, all these different styles that these teams run, they can all obviously work and they can all obviously fail, but what makes these strats, you have to find ways to make them work, and that's by keeping your opponents guessing and making sure they're not ever sure what you're going to be doing. And I think FNATIC does that the best of any team, and that's why you see a team like LDLC even has success. I don't think they do it with the same finesse that FNATIC does, but since they're so much more predicated on some individual plays here and there, their players like to take those risks and they like to get in those fights and they win them a lot. That keeps people off their guard because you never know when, Shox is going to come around a corner, guns blazing for no reason other than, he has got a gut feeling.
There's one more team at the MLG event that we have to talk about, okay? And it's Dignitas, the Danish team. Okay. And obviously, if you talk about Dreamhack Winter, holy fuck was that bad. They got to the round of 8. They got the 1 round of 8 opponent where it's okay, boys, you should definitely be going through here. Navi's good, but the difference is when I did that structure like that, where it's LDLC FNATIC top, Virtus Pro 3rd, maybe Navi's 4th, but they're a significant 4th where they're not going to be going above the other 3. Okay, so Dignitas, that's your chance. If you really are as good as their talent says they should be, that's the team you're going to beat, and you're going to go to the semis, you're going to play the winner of the other game, and then it's game on, And they got humiliated in that round of 8 against
they did.
Navi.
Oh boy! And here's the thing about Navi is, I understand why you put him 4 in your top 10, but I would actually have him lower personally. But Navi's that team, like you said, Virtus Pro is that consistent 3rd, and if you can win if you can be Virtus Pro, you have what it takes to win a championship. But with Navi, I always feel like they always beat better teams that are underperforming, and they also sometimes lose to worse teams who are overperforming. They don't ever they play up and down to levels, I feel like.
And the famous saying is we always say they play to the level of their opponent. Yeah. So if they play a good team, they'll look, it'll be close, they'll be really good. Like when they played Dig, actually. So on that Mirage game, Dig was winning, but then Navi came back and made it close. But the difference is, if they play teams below, if they play Hellraisers or something, they can go down to Hellraisers level as well. The old Hellraisers, that was worse,
And here's the thing. Well, the thing that, Dignitas, they've been such a hard team to read because their whole thing as a team was they were just terrible at T sides and they were just amazing at CT sides, but the meta caught up to them and everyone's amazing at CT sides in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. So they have no benefit anymore.
Yeah, you're not getting anything out of it. That's why they used to get all these second places and every other team's like, all right, well now we're just going to step up our CT game, and they're just kind of screwed. They lost their edge. So I don't think they've played much. They brought in Kerrigan. Yeah.
Instead of
they've played just the qualifier for MLG. I think I didn't actually see this match, so I didn't get a chance to see him, but they've always had those T-side struggles, so I don't think much is going to have to change. They're just potential. I don't know what to read out of there. We talk so much about potential and how, at a certain point, you're just kind of what you are.
Yeah, yeah.
And it strikes me as, hopefully this change just brings something, and it's a crucial role in the game. So they could come out and just, they looked amazing in those qualifiers from what the scores I saw. I didn't actually get to see the matches, but yeah, I'm hoping that could be the big change they needed. That might have just worked out for them.
No, that's the thing, is for me, this event and the first ones with Karrigan are the decider. It's like either maybe Fetish was like holding them back, maybe he had the wrong approach, maybe he didn't understand how to use a certain player. Like, for example, their problem famously is that them one of their main stars device has been choking it. He would even admit, by the way, that he chokes in semi-finals and the big pressure games. He knows it happens. Like, he can't play close to the really all-star level he can have in like a group stage or round of 8 type match. So the big problem to me is a way that we can get out of that, where it's not just that he's permanently going to choke and he's got some huge problem he has to overcome, is maybe it turns out that with a different in-game leader, he gets put in a different situation, or they call it a different tempo, and maybe they figure it out that way. Maybe it turns out that the potential is there to be this good, and they can go to finals and win, and that can be the quick fix. But if over these first few tournaments, with a totally different in-game leader, similar things arise, like he chokes again, or similar problems on T side, at that point then we have to kind of say, well, no, that's the character and the identity of these players, you know. Like, even changing the in-game leader didn't fix whatever the individual players had or whatever didn't work as a unit, you know. So I think that's what these events can decide for you to a degree. Like, before they just kept running the same thing over and over, but now that we change a variable, I think you'll see if certain things were set in stone to a degree.
Yeah. And it's like that with a lot of teams. I mean, you look at all these roster changes we have going into this event. You know, the new AWPer lineup that we've talked about, how good they can be. This new Dignitas caller and Maikelele and NiP, who, you know, we've seen some of these things in action, but this is like that first major we get to see them at. So this will kind of be, and then you have like the 2 best teams in the world. So this will be kind of cool to see where the chips fall. But yeah, Dignitas, even with this change, I don't know. They've never really like impressed me. Even when they were getting like second places,
third to fourth, they always made semis.
Third to fourth. I've never felt like, oh god, this team looks cool. This team is gonna get there. You know, it just kind of feels a little shaky at times. And part of that is probably because they always used to just bomb their T sides, and they'd have to come back massively on their CT sides. You know, it's hard to get rounds on your T side, but it's so crucial that you find ways to be successful. You know, even like some piss poor halves of Counter-Strike, you never know. You can win like 2 rounds right at the end and get up to 4, and that's actually like 4 to 5 rounds on your T side. Even 4 sometimes is you're like feeling okay. You're like, all right, whatever. It's Counter-Strike Go, because even now, you know, the pistol rounds don't even matter as much anymore because you can win all these ecos. So 4 rounds is like, you know, there's not as much pressure on your pistol rounds anymore.
I actually feel like, okay, this will sound like I'm just going to deflate the whole MLG event before it even happens. I have to admit, on paper it looks awesome. Like, aside from mousespaz, who honestly I don't give a fuck about, like, half of their players could die on the way over and another set of players could replace them and I wouldn't know. Like, they could just say they were the same players. Like, that's the sort of level of like ambivalence I have over them. But the other team's okay. Like LDLC, FNATIC, NiP, Dignitas, AWPers. I can't wait to see these teams play. It'd be awesome. But I have to admit, even as much as I say that, the real thing I want from this event, everything else can happen. You can change anything you want. Just please, I need to see LDLC play FNATIC in a best of 3. I need to see that. That's my main thing I'm going in. I just want to see, and I want to see them where they both play really awesome level and go full head to head. What we should have had in that third map, basically.
Yeah, wouldn't that be cool? Now, would you prefer, like, does it matter where they do this BYO3?
They can do it anywhere, as long as it happens. That's all I care about.
As long as it occurs.
I mean, listen, in an ideal world, you'd want it to be in the final. Like, that's the thing. Here's a factor that people don't think about, by the way, but I even said this at the event, and it kind of blew people's minds. When Dreamhack Winter was happening, and I was there doing the analysis desk, and I was behind the scenes, when all that shit was going down, where the admins were deciding, like, well, what do we do about this overpass thing and all the rest of it, I just said to the admins, you caught such a lucky break that Hellraisers managed to win that map against FNATIC and put them both into the quarterfinals when this happened. Because, by the way, if FNATIC really had stored it up and everything had come out that way, they would have met in the final, and that would have been the end of the last map of the tournament. And you would have had to crown the winner, then do all of this. Like, that would have literally killed your whole event. And that would have been the biggest shit. If you think people hate FNATIC now, imagine if they'd done that in the grand final in the last map. So everyone's friends are tuning in like, holy shit, you got to see this boost. Imagine that would be like end of world type level. You couldn't even survive that. Think about that.
No, I would not want to be an admin at that event. That would be the most miserable decision to make. Holy shit.
I mean, are you on the same hype train? You want to see that match?
Yeah, I would absolutely love to see that, and I would love to see it in the finals personally. But yeah, anywhere you can get it, you're gonna take it. And I would also, I'd also love to see NiP and FNATIC go at it.
For sure.
I think
there's a lot of bad blood there for sure.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stories that go way back with that one, but there could be some cool matchups. I want to see this new AWPer lineup and or whatever organization they're going to be at the time. They look good, and like it's just going to be so interesting. It starts off so hot, and then I think even FNATIC's going to the not as big of an event, but there's that ClutchCon in Denver like a week later. I think FNATIC's going to be at that. AWPer and Cloud9 both going to that. So just 1 week later again.
And then in Finland, there's the Aces tournament that NiP and Titan are going to. So
and there's what, 2 or 3 more teams get announced.
Yeah, so there should be some more teams there. Okay, so I've got a question for you here.
All right.
In theory, this should come out like tonight or the day after. Like it'll only be a couple of days turnaround, but none of this has been announced yet. But essentially, behind the scenes, everyone knows that there are all these other big esports organizations in North America that are either going to get on board now or they're all trying to. They're all looking at teams. So some of them are from Call of Duty, some of them are from League of Legends. And in theory, if this happens, you know what we were saying before about there is talent and there's even veteran players who like can't get on the top 2 teams but would play if they had the opportunity. In theory, can't this take away a lot of the fucking excuses that I have to hear every time about, there's not enough lands and it's no good team and all that? Like, this can fix everything, right? If these teams come in, Daddy Warbucks with all the cash.
These organizations come in and just start throwing cash around.
If these teams come in and they keep their eye out and they counter the kind of logic of the scene and they say to one of the teams, like, you're going to be like solely ours in the mid of our organization, like if these organizations were to come in, it would help things, right?
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
See all those Easter eggs I threw in there in the most obvious manner possible. Okay, keep going.
I mean, you'd certainly hope so, but you know us Americans, we like to find excuses for things, and I'm sure there'll be some. I mean, what it comes down to isn't necessarily the organizations, because you look at the tournaments that are held abroad, and still there's only like 2 or 3 slots to North American teams for an invite, and justifiably so. We don't have enough teams to send 4 teams over. It's not even fucking worth it. But organizations coming in are obviously great, but you hope that at some point there comes to be, I don't even care. I would love to have a major in North America, but just we need lands for North America, because you want to talk about these younger players developing. Even if they go to these events and just get smashed their first couple times by better teams, they improve and they keep showing up, and that's the way you get better. So the organizations are awesome, but we just need more events. And I'm hoping that with these more organizations comes events just sprouting up like they used to. We used to have these grassroots events in every region in North America, for every month there were like 2 or 3 back when I was playing. So we need something like that. But I'm really interested to see which organizations hop into this, because I've heard some rumors, but it's almost a bummer for me, because I look at some of these teams. There's going to be some mediocre team
who's going to get a big org,
getting picked up by
that will be unfortunately the problem, is that they might burn that org. That's the one thing I'm worried about.
There's going to get some team that just gets rewarded for nothing just because organizations need to cash in on this Counter-Strike hype right now.
But I do hope that hopefully that has an upside. Like, even if that team doesn't live up to it, at least you've sort of created some jobs there. In theory, now another set of players can replace them, or you can bring in a new player, and you've got the org to back you up. So in theory, you can build off it, I hope.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. And you'd hope that with that sponsorship and, obviously without knowing terms of contract, if there's like a salary or something involved, whatever organization it might be, these players will be able to, have the motivation or have the money or have the time to devote more time to get better at Counter-Strike. And you just hope they find effective ways to do it.
No, what's funny is when you said, like, no matter what, North Americans will find a way to find an excuse. Oh, believe me, I know. Here's one of the great excuses that I've never been able to stop hearing from fucking Cloud9 players. It's that one of like, well, we don't live in Europe, and we only come here for like one event every 3 months, so we come here and listen, we get that boot camp, and we're always like, oh, I'm loving this boot camp, like it's really good high level practice. But we don't have the long enough boot camp. It's only a week, it's 2 weeks maximum. So you know what happened this time? They thought to themselves, you know what, fuck it, we won't go home after Face It. We'll just stay in Europe. We'll go to ESWC next, and then we'll just stay in Europe again, and we'll go to DreamHack Winter, and we'll do an extended boot camp. So in theory, that excuse, they'd gotten past it. Okay, they were going to have all this time. So you know what they said as soon as they went out of DreamHack Winter? I think we boot camped for too long. We really should have gone home. It's like, Motherfucker, you were just going to say anything there. Where you can't win in that scenario.
No, I mean, there is an amount of truth to that, but that's something they should have known going into that. Just being away for so long. I mean, you absolutely can get burnt out in boot camps, but and also they did a lot of traveling for Cloud9. You know, they went to like the Logitech headquarters, and they traveled to a lot of different countries. You know, during that month, so they I think it was, and you know, it was every team at ESEA looked exhausted. Like the FNATIC guys, obviously coming off that controversy, were not only demotivated, but with all the travel that they had done in the past 3 months, like Cloud9, FNATIC, Virtus Pro, they all just looked dead tired the entire event, and you could just see it. They were just kind of like lackadaisical around the hotel and things like that. So that was just a rough stretch for those guys, and especially with that month in there. I mean, not to make excuses for them, because I agree. Like, if you're gonna do that 1 month boot camp, like, you need to perform. Like that's just crazy. Like you have to do whatever it takes to not get burnt out. And I don't know if it was.
I mean, they bombed 3 events in a row.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe it wasn't just being burnt out. Maybe they were just. I guess.
I mean, I could believe they also burned out. Like that's an example of where. Be careful what you wish for. Like you're saying, oh, I wish we had more weeks. Well, you don't actually know what that's going to be like. Like for all you know. As weird as this sounds, maybe in terms of going to Europe, the sweet spot was to have a week boot camp or bordering on 2 weeks boot camp. Maybe having that and then tournaments as well, and then not having time to go home. And like the problem with that scenario is it's the same reason why I think in CS gaming houses don't work. They work really well in other games, but I think the reason in CS why they don't is because you need like to decompress. You need to have your practice hours of whatever, 6 to 11 or whatever, but then all the other time you have to at least have the option to not have to see any of those motherfuckers and not have to talk to one of them and not have to have one in your face. When you're watching television to decompress later, you don't want one of them, you don't want Senfis's fucking troll face looking at you saying annoying things. That's not enjoyable at that point in time. You need to be able to press a little Skype red phone and turn him off and have that night to yourself, you know. It keeps teams together is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and what was it, MBK said after they won the major? He was like, yeah, we were playing like 20 hours of World of Warcraft leading up to the event every week and blah, blah, blah. And, you know,
by the way, that's true, by the way. LDLC is one of the few teams who did no boot camp. They actually took time off because they'd been in all those finals. They took time off, and then I think like 2 or 3 days out, they just did a little warm-up because they already knew their level, you know. They just have to be comfortable at that point.
Yeah, and they probably put in some, like, obviously some, like, deathmatch hours in their own. But, yeah, I mean, sometimes that's what you need. And, you know, we used to see it remember in, like, the old CPL days, since we're doing some, you know, nostalgia blast from the past.
Oh, I know where you're going already. You mean the Lethal Gamers boot camp.
Yeah.
Or the team who won that almost never placed, like, top 12 ever.
Yeah,
like, dude,
crushed.
Think about how many of those fucking DeBears won. And then he would just go get his head smashed in at the back end.
He was like, oh, I'm feeling really good this tournament.
And that was why. It's because they used to play all night long till like 6 in the morning, eating pizzas and drinking soda. And by the time they got to the event, it's like they'd done 2 events already and they were like burnt to a crisp.
Yeah, and even CPL was like that. Like, there's no tournaments these days that do it like CPL did. It was just a full-blown BYOC. Like, the professional players would be in the crowd playing games until 4 in the morning.
You don't know how many North American players I know who told me this story at CPLs. They would be at one of their first couple of CPLs, okay, and they'd be like, dude, last night we beat NiP. Well, not NiP, you know, it'd be like SK at the time. We beat SK on like Mill. We're going to do awesome in this tournament. But then because they'd only got like 3 hours sleep, they'd just get completely rolled like first couple of rounds. They'd be out of the tournament. And they'd be like, and then SK would win the tournament, be like, that could have been us, man. We beat him. And I was like, no, you should. That scrim that you won at like 4 in the morning, you'd have been better just being asleep then, dude. Or like have some water or, you know, something. That,
if you've had too many balls and too many $4 pizzas, you're just delirious.
By the way, I realize we have drifted into nostalgia, but that alone, by the way, is one of the factors that people never understood from the North American scene. You know what, the SK team that dominated everything in 2003, won all those tournaments? They were one of the first teams to have strict rules, like we drink water all the time, like we try to go to bed on time. Meanwhile, every other team was people like DeBears, just like they were on like their 7th balls by about like 2 p.m. and they might have to play for 8 more hours, you know. Like, think of that'll fuck your system up completely.
Well, and there was all the drinking and everything. That was just such a shit show at those CPLs, man.
No, but that's the thing. People wouldn't understand the lack of professionalism. As in, teams would still be in the tournament and they'd be going to the bar before they had to play 8 a.m. the next morning. Now, I won't lie, every now and then there's a freak person, like there is in real sports. Like, you know, supposedly Wilt Chamberlain in basketball really was some sort of athletic freak where he used to go and like eat 2 margarita pizzas at half time and drink like Pepsi and still go and play a fucking athletic game and be like an athletic beast, okay? But that's because he's a freak of nature. That's not because that's a good lifestyle, okay? Well, in the same vein, the player who played for SK in 2002 called Zenon, right? He was a famous Quake player. And the thing with him was he wasn't a godlike CS player, but he was just like super cool under pressure because he was an old Quake player, had really good nerves of steel. So I actually stayed out one night with him till like 5 a.m. drinking and just watching movies. And then I forgot that he literally had to play like the final at like 9 the next morning. But he just turned up like a fucking like out of a movie or something. Just won the final, like didn't give a fuck, even played well in it, just sort of like cruised off. Yeah, well, what do you mean? Yeah, it was fine. I got a few hours sleep. It's fine. That most people can't do that. Like in terms of modern professionalism, you gotta treat it like a sport. Unfortunately, now if you want to win, you know.
Yeah, it is. I'll tell you this because I just went to my last event last year. It is you get older, you know. I need longer hours of sleep, man.
If you're a caster, you get destroyed, don't you? It kills you.
Oh my!
Because you start so early in the morning.
So much more exhausting than I expected it to be. It was, oof.
And by about 9 p.m., here's a little secret I'll give to the younger guys out there. When I do my events now, I ration that energy drink out. Like I know I'm going to need it, but that's like I have like that in a red emergency glass. I don't have that at 11 in the morning.
I gotcha.
I wait till I can tell at about 4 in p.m. I'm flagging, and I know there's 5 hours to go. That's when I break the glass and I have it, you know, because. Yeah. If you have it at the 11 a.m. rather, you're fucked by 3. Like you're not going to make it to the end of the day, bro. Your brain's going to be slow.
Yeah, and then you got to get another one, and then you just start crashing, and you don't even feel like you're present and like understand what's going on.
It's a bad state of affairs.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, let me just throw this. Listen, you know how I like to court controversy in my world, so you don't have to openly say anything here, okay? You don't have to throw anyone under the bus, but I will just say. I don't know, the public doesn't know this, but one of the reasons why the Danish scene is so fucked up is also a reason why, to a degree, some of the North American scene is fucked up. So when we're talking now about people staying up too late at events and partying and like drinking and stuff, there's also some people who have kind of a herbal relaxant ritual that they like to get into. And this is ruining the Danish scene because there's a couple of key players who should be really good who can't get in teams or they only stay in teams for a few months because of this particular lifestyle choice that they have. And that's always been present in the North American scene. And we know from CPLs, dude. I remember one time going into the fucking... Again, this is a name no one will know, but you'll know. I went into the Weekend Warriors...
Weekend Warrior rival.
They were the original ones. Yeah, the Weekend Warriors hotel room, and it was like it was like being in the hull of a steamboat.
Yeah, I did the same thing. It's like hitting a wall.
It's ridiculous. And you were like, how can you... You're like, dude, you have to play in like 5 hours. What are you doing? So is that still present in North America to a degree, do you think?
Not to that degree.
Have they buckled down a bit now?
Yeah, things have calmed down a little bit. I mean, listen... I could make a list of all the teams with so much potential that I've seen ruined, and all the players from that particular habit, and it's still around a little bit today. But I think, for the most part, especially in the past year, you know, my first ESEA I went to like 2 years ago, it was pretty bad, and then this past year, the couple of ESEAs I was at, you know, it wasn't as prevalent before matches. You know, it was kind of like a evening.
Because the thing is, I've known that's the thing. It's when people are like, unfortunately, this is an aspect that comes along with the scene not being as professional and people not having proper teams, is that they don't feel like the obligation to have to be professionals, you know, and they don't think who cares anyway, and then part of going to ESEA, you feel like the fourth best team becomes like chilling out with your friends, and you're not going to win the event anyway. But unfortunately, that's all like a vicious cycle. Once you get into that mode like that, well, you're not going to have enough sleep, you're not going to play well, you're going to be burned out, and you're not going to improve. Whereas the difference is, at least as far as I know, a lot of the European events, the team who's like the hungry up and coming ones, they're not doing that shit, you know. They're just going like it was a CPL. They're going to try and win it and prove themselves. And so I hope the NA scene's got out of that, because that used to be something that dragged it down in the past, right?
Yeah, and it definitely did. But I think for the most part, we're over that. I think, you know, the players that you look to have big performances and have big matches, that's for the most part not a problem at all. Okay, so without naming names, I think, you know, the players that you want to see have a good event, the players that you expect to come up big in their matches in the mornings and the afternoons, they're not. You can tell the professionals in our scene, basically.
Okay. So the MLG event that's coming up now.
Yeah.
Do you know much about MLG as an organization? Like, I only know them vaguely from StarCraft, and I know that they haven't been involved in CS at all. Do you get the sense?
They have actually. They actually tried to get in it a little bit ago. I believe through the Bears was actually working for them doing StarCraft stuff, and they asked him. This was probably in like 2000 and late 2012, I want to say.
Okay.
They had set up, not any kind of league, but they had set up like a 5-on-5 like ladder system where like you could sign up to like play another team in matches during this block of time and kind of work your way up the ladder, and they just kind of wanted to see what the community response to it was going to be to kind of decide where to go.
Okay, so that's my question about this then. Do you get the sense that this first event is kind of like the tester? Like if this goes really well and say the numbers are blockbuster numbers and they have really great matches, and maybe here's something that sometimes happens, maybe they see like LDLC play FNATIC and they see like, wow, what a great game, and they're like, we want to get more into this, like Sundance or whatever that guy is comes like, yeah, I want CS in this tournament. Do you get the sense that it's a tester, like there's more planned if it goes well, and if it on the other side, obviously, if it bombs, is that just it? Do you think they pull out and it's just back to ESEA only for North America? What's your sense?
My sense is that if you want to have a tester tournament, you don't do it at the X Games. I think they're approaching this event at the X Games with ESPN being involved. I think they're expecting to just knock this out of the park, to be completely frank with you.
Okay.
And from everything I've talked to from some of the MLG guys, and just from what I've seen like from on Twitter and just some conversations and some people I've talked to who have been involved with MLG in the past, they're working to make this the best event they possibly can, whether it be these cheating prevention methods that have started getting popular since Dreamhack, and I think they've been talking about having soundproof booths on the stage for the teams who are on the stage match. So I mean, everything I've heard out of it is that they're setting it up to be just this massive home run event, and I don't think you can do anything else than at the X Games. Like how can you have an event at the X Games and then not just try and fucking nail it?
Okay, I've got one last question for you now. This is the real test. No matter... Okay, there was a trend in North American Counter-Strike, which is that a lot of the North Americans, for obvious reasons, were in denial that the Europeans were better. They would be like, nah, 3D would beat them if they were on their game, or it's just the North American thing of like, yeah, America can be number one, like we should be number one. But there would always be the guys who, they were smart guys, they would get it figured out. Your brother was one of them, people like that. They would be like, no, obviously the top Europeans are better. They've got something over us. We have to work towards that level. But I know at least deep down, part of them still rooted for NA. Even if they hated some of the 3D guys, if they went out of the tournament, they still sort of hoped that like K-Sharp and Rambo owned the Euros and won the tournament, and at least Rival came third, and they always had that hope. Do you have like a secret hope, like iBuyPower, win this event, like prove that the dream is alive? Is that still burning inside you?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is.
Yeah, it is. I have my teams in Europe that I root for that I really really like, but even when iBuyPower was in their slumps for not getting out of group stage, I was still holding out. I was like, iBuyPower, Cloud9, please, one of you has to bring it home. One of you has to make us proud. And I still cling on to that, even though it seems hopeless. And
so did that NiP cobblestone GSL1 clone just break your heart into a million pieces?
It felt like Freiburg was kicking me in the balls through the internet. Like it hurt to watch the way that they lost some of those rounds because Cloud9 had that match.
Yeah.
Like they had it.
That was an example of a game where unless you're looking at the CT's positioning, you think you're going to win all these rounds on T side. Like, we're going to get into the site, we're going to do it. But then every time you'd switch to the NiP position, they were in some fucked up weird position. You're like, oh god, this is he's behind him, and he's it's like a horror movie. The guy. As long as you don't show a certain perspective, he doesn't know the guy has the knife behind that wall,
Yeah, no, NiP did a really good job of just collectively killing every dream of every North American fan out there, and it was so hard to watch. But still, I want to see an American team because throughout all of Counter-Strike, we've always had even back in 1.6, we had teams that could compete. We've been in this position before where we have, it used to be like 3D was the only team, and then, my team United 5 came up and showed that another second team could really contest, and then the Cole guys came along and kind of took up the banner for a while, and it was a constant struggle between those guys, and GamerCo was getting third in like 4 CPLs in a row. And I see you kind of see a repetition of that pattern, like how history kind of repeats itself. We had this Cloud9 team was always the team, they hadn't won anything, but they were carrying the banner, and then iBuyPower started finally showing up to the party, and now we have this third team, Denial, coming in who, still a little bit shaky, but they're showing some hope that they can develop into this team that can fight the Euros. So am I on this like North American hype train? Like this is finally like the event that we're going to beat the Euros? No, but we're starting to see our teams like really compete, and we have this dream lineup. These are probably the 5 guys. If last year someone was like, name 5 people, like the end of last year, 6 months into last year, someone was like, name the 5 players you want on a team, and these are the 5 that most people would probably say.
Yeah.
So
okay, on that particular note, isn't there a part of you, because this is how I feel, who, listen, that's all great. Like, I agree. Now that Shroud dropped off a little bit the last few tournaments, this would probably be the dream team if I had to pick it. Like, I'd give AZK the nod right now.
Yeah.
So this is the dream team, but even so, there's a part of me that's like, Skadoodle, Swag, I don't know which one of you was involved in this, but fuck you for not letting me see that iBuyPower lineup, at least play that Dreamhack Winter event. We saw the Face It, we saw a decent performance at ESWC. I wanted to see Dreamhack Winter.
Yeah.
That was going to be the Kappa. Then I'd really realised, not Kappa, the fucking emoji or whatever I would say. That would be the one, I wanted to see it.
That was so weird. Like, the timing of it was just like, when I saw that news, I was just like, what the fuck are they doing over there? Yeah, and even, because, what was so big about it was that they cut both of them. If they just wanted to drop Steel and just bring someone in and plug him in, because Steel had already expressed he wasn't interested in playing with them like a month or two before
that one made sense, because it had already been said even before Face It that he was apparently going to leave. And so it was known, but the Dazed one came out of nowhere.
That was like I don't know where that came from, and I don't know because here's the funny part is at Dreamhack Winter and at ESEA you saw AZK, they didn't have time to change anything, and you basically saw AZK calling Daze strats, and it was just like, why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you just have Daze calling Daze strats? He is, in my opinion, the better strat caller. I know AZK has experience doing it, but why would you call the same exact things? It's just kind of weird. It was very, very strange. And yeah, it is a little bit of a fuck you, because after Face It especially, like, that team was heating up, and they were looking really good. Their Dust 2 for that stretch, like at the end of the at the end of the year, it was probably the way they took map control of those B tunnels. Just FNATIC didn't even know what to do when they encountered it. They beat FNATIC on Dust 2, so they were looking really good in a lot of ways, and it would have been nice to see that lineup for sure.
Okay, do you have a final message for anyone who watched the show?
Yeah, well, just I'm doing casting for ESEA this season, so we're actually a lot of cool plans for ESEA TV that I can't divulge, but keep an eye on ESEA. And
do you do every match in Invite when it's online? Do you pick a match each week? How does it work?
We hired a bunch of casters this season, so we have about 5 or 6 total casters, and we'll probably be rotating about three days each during the week, and we'll probably be set to cast any Invite match.
RIP to my boy Dust. Much like the map Dust, he's been retired. Now we're looking for Dust 2. And he will be forgotten, just like Dust.
We'll find him.
Okay.
But yeah, just so check out ESEA and keep an eye on that. And then just if you guys like what you heard, follow me on Twitter at JMosesOT. Throw some cool things out there during events and everything that I see when I'm watching live matches and stuff. So other than that, just good talking to you again, Duncan.
Okay, good stuff, mate.